Hello, everyone. Hello. So, we are going to see if this works. Because while we've been away, and there are lots of people that have joined us, so I should really, I need to reorganize this to an extent. Because I'm now disappearing. Give me a second. Where am I going to put the questions? Oh no, I'm back. Who went? Someone went. I'll say apologies. So, while we've been away, whilst Runon hasn't done anything, as far as I know, to Powder Monkey, Streambot has updated from 2.6 to 2.8. And I did the download of that yesterday, tested out, it seemed to be okay. And now, I'm not sure why, but apparently it looks like it's now working. So, Runon, I think that proves my theory was correct and it wasn't your coding. I know you were getting tempted to blame my firewalls, but I didn't think it was them either. Happy birthday, Stafford. It's your birthday tomorrow. Hello, Dan. Hello, Colin Cameron. Has someone grabbed the Colin Cameron's one? Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, you do, Steve. You do. But I think we should all say thanks to Steve. And I should make sure the audio output is working for everyone else. So, yes, we should say thanks to Steve. Everything's working. Broadly speaking.
You may have spoken too soon. Hang on.
Well,
nothing's working. Everything's on fire. Yay.
Oh, there it goes. It had a hang.
We're not the Admiral Kuznetsov, Dan.
Oh, hold on. Just a minute. Look, that ship as built and for the first 10 years of its service was fine. It's just that, that it fell victim to the whole Russian bit.
I'm going
I
to
was
step
just being
away
humorous,
and throw
please.
out together.
I know. I just have to keep saying it because the narrative is so far in favor of the, constant fires
no.
that everyone forgets what happened before.
I will just point out,
I was playing to the meme. Please.
I know.
Now, people don't need to hear me now, so I'm leaving this channel and leaving it to Dr. Clarke and the crew and everybody else. Thank you, everybody. I'll be on chat.
Bye, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
So, do we want to go down to the streaming box, or what it's called?
Dr. Clarke's the Bruships stage. The Bruships stage.
Yes.
The stage where Bruships is.
We should be in the
I would recommend that.
Oh. Well, I have no idea.
I think we are in the Bruship stage, aren't we? We're not.
Nope, we're not.
Did I get moved out?
I moved Dan. You got to move yourself.
Oh, okay. Yes, well, I'll move to the Bruship stage.
And I'll be right back.
Oh, wow, the chow.
Ciao.
And...
Bella
I
ciao,
just had it
Bella
full
ciao,
screen the
Bella
whole time. Apparently got moved around. Hello, everyone. And now it also shows who's here. That is useful.
Woo!
Because it shows you that we have Dan, we have Fleet of Oceans, we have Ghost Foxo, and we have Runon. And it's always good to have Foxo here because she keeps Fleet in line. And we do need someone to keep Fleet in line.
Threats to the host will keep the local fleets in line.
So
we're not threatening Hosh. We're just explaining to Feet what might happen were he to misbehave.
Who's this? Who are you talking about?
You.
There, well, you didn't say my name.
Feet of Oceans.
You forgot the L there, Dan.
Oh.
Feet of Opens?
No, come on. Say it right. Defu I can handle. Defu I can handle. Boop I can handle. But I draw the line at Feet of Oceans.
So you'd be okay with Sheep of Oceans?
I'm not okay with that one either. Defoe, fine.
And Stafford,
Boop, I
yeah,
can
no,
I can tolerate it.
one thing I
But-
will say, Stafford, is you're actually not far away from my sister's birthday because that was Friday. So you know, you're literally within days of sharing a birthday with my sister.
I'm going to come back in as the mod team and say that the way that Sheep of Oceans went last time means that it is on my sloop list, and I will vigorously moderate it.
Okay. Yeah, it's using the right. It's using the right thing. It is using the right thing. That's good. So that being said, let's do this first question from Colin Karen. Having gone to a museum with an actual Fritz X on display, comparing it to the size of battleship shells, it seems small. Was it aimed to avoid the armor, or does the air launch give it more penetrating power? It's a bit of both. It's the angle it's coming into. You have to remember a battleship shell is designed to possibly pierce the armor at its thickest point, whereas Fritz X is theoretically going to come in on the deck armor at an angle to hopefully get through the deck armor. So
Fritz X is a fun. Yeah, it's coming at the problem of penetrating a deck from the literal out of context problem.
Yes.
Because it's literally going, yes, this deck armor that's designed to resist shells coming at an angle. I'm coming in straight down.
Yeah.
And I don't care how thick your deck is unless it's like 10 inches thick. I'm going through. And ironically enough, if you don't have a thick enough deck, I'll go right through your entire ship, which is probably what you want.
Which is why a couple of destroyers actually end up surviving.
And Warspite gets lucky.
Yeah, well, it's Warspite.
I know.
Ever a ship in history which has literal plot armor, Warspite has it.
Unfortunately, one of the 3 Littorios does not get lucky because it has a relatively thick deck, which is enough for the bomb to pierce, but then for it to fetch up somewhere very explosive, and then it goes off.
Well,
That's
the
because,
thing
because
is,
all of the Italian Navy's plot armor was taken by Giulio Cesare.
Yes.
Yes, but
No. If again, in nicest way, if there was a battle between Warspite and Giulio Cesare, they would go on firing at each other for hours, and it would just be a hilarious lines of how the frigate did that miss. They'd end up ramming each other to try and win the battle, and then they probably still manage to somehow both survive and limp home.
But you'd watch as every single other ship involved in the fighting would explode.
Yes.
Even if the shells didn't even go near them, they'd just be kind of like randomly suffering catastrophic failures.
possible.
Right then. So, who's got Discord notifications turned on? I shouldn't have. They should have turned off.
The only person who can feed back anything other than their voice into the stream is the person doing the streaming. So therefore, that narrows it down to, unfortunately, Discord being funny on your end, Alex.
Yep, I'm just checking that one.
Poke it with a stick and see what happens. This can only go well.
Because the trouble is, so many things have updated themselves since I got back. Apparently, I went away for a week and I came back to everything getting updated.
Oh yeah, they fiddled with Discord again. They changed the way it looks as well.
And yeah, I have disabled all notification sounds from Discord again. So hopefully,
Yay.
that should be fine. And let's see. The Q release button worked.
Damn.
Oh, good lord. Bowmere boy, what happens to the liquid inside torpedo defense systems when being dry docked? Was it drained or kept, and were there any sort of chemicals added to prevent clogging? It was drained, and the reason it's drained is literally to make the vessel light enough to be far easier to dry dock. Because you can think about all the weights that would have been stored in those water tanks, and how much weight that would have added, especially to not just the ship's weight, but just think about when you're dry docking a ship, you literally take the water out, and you're having to support the hull, And if you've got all that water out from, and you're not supporting the hull with water, it's not displacing water anymore. It's literally sitting there being supported by a piece of wood, etc. You don't want that extra weight in there. You really don't. That's a good way to cause trouble to your hull and cause it to deform. So it's all gone. Stafford Thompson did a test. Thank you, Stafford. Black Horse. How often were the German U-boat pens attacked, and how much of an effect did it have on U-boat operations? More often than the RAF would really like to admit, less than, frankly, the RAF would like to admit as well. Because
And to be fair, the Royal
Navy
everyone had
also
a go.
everyone had a go. But the thing is, the U-boat pens are a good example of, if you put enough concrete and steel into something, you can make it virtually impenetrable to all but the biggest and most massive bombs, which basically come into service at the end of the war. At which point there's a race between the bombers actually being used on the U-boat pens and basically multiple armored divisions from various nations trying to take the U-boat pens.
Although the funny
And
Yeah,
to
go
be fair, the Canadians won that race. It was the Canadian armored divisions which won that race of taking the most.
some of them, because remember, one of the things people do forget is that there were an awful lot of Festungs's in France that just held out until the end of the war. I mean, the last offensive in the West was the Germans punching out of Dunkirk to say we could still do this before retreating back into Dunkirk. They lasted right up to the end of the war, some of the cities.
That really wasn't much of them being able to say we can still do this. That was more them breaking out and then going, oh. And it was basically, we broke out against
weird.
C units. Yay, we're winning.
Yeah,
and then,
yes,
frigate, there's a
very
B
much,
unit coming straight for us. Back to our defences, back now, back quickly.
Yeah. Oh, Alex, turn me down on Discord. So go into Discord and turn me
I know
down.
the settings. I regularly do use it.
Yes.
I already have.
Apparently I am very loud.
How's that, everyone? Everyone like that?
Hello,
What do you think?
It's me. I'm doing speaking, so people can tell me how loud I am or I'm not.
Oh, it is. Do we all agree this is an improvement?
Well, the last thing I want to do, having streamed myself, is overwhelm people, because the worst thing on a stream is to have one person louder or quieter than the others, because then you hear nothing, basically.
Oh.
Wait, is he evolving?
Some days he is. Okay, let's leave it at that.
Maybe he'll someday evolve,
Into a real boy?
I was going to say a functioning eyes and visual cortex.
But no. After last night's high, he really needs to get object permanence first. I'll be real.
Hey, we did well, mostly.
Wait, why are we trying to install object permanence into fleet again? Is it to remind him that the Hosh has long since been turned into razor blades?
No, in a nicest way. The more interesting thing is, I'm going to be taking him and Drac to Mikasa at the end of this year.
Oh.
Think about that. I'm taking the person who swears Hosh is the prettiest ship ever built, and the person who basically loves all British battleships to a disturbingly high degree sometimes, to see the last remaining British...
Well, the last remaining
battleship of
pre-dreadnought
that era.
period. Yeah. The pitting under the French
At a certain
ships built
point,
for
I am
Japan
possibly going to have to warn the Japanese authorities they need to have extra protection for Mikasa that day.
I mean, what's that going to do? Dig her out of concrete?
Just remember.
I'm not
that
sure what
you
you
can't
two
leave
might
Fleet
do. I
alone.
don't want to think about it.
Just don't leave Fleet alone. He'll forget you exist.
Hey!
To be fair, though, with Drac, I have to admit I do own one, because literally while I was away last week, I was ended up doing some work on the old house in Epsom, and I was just finishing that work, and I was merrily leaving rubbish, which was going to be picked up by someone in a couple of weeks. Well, not in a couple of weeks, in a couple of days, sort of thing. And I got a phone call telling me that there was someone coming to see the house the next day. So I rang Drac up and said, you know, you have some friends you can call if you need to bury a body and you don't want questions asked. And I kid you not, his response was, I've got a shovel, where do you need me? I kid you not. Luckily, it's not a body.
Uh.
It's just some stuff I need to move. And he did. He came and picked up. This was at 10:30 at night on a random weekday evening. He comes out to help me. Yeah, he's a good friend.
Good times.
Well, benefit
Speaking
of being
speaking of the,
self-employed, if you need to
yeah.
miss a day, you get more
Yeah.
leeway with that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Also, congratulations are in order to Ruin On for landing the job. Well
New
done.
job. Yes, new job.
Yeah, new job.
Well,
a good
I
new
mean,
job.
it wasn't that hard. It was just I had to drive into Richmond, sign some paperwork, and then make 2 phone calls.
That's good.
That's okay.
Union.
You're starting to like a union, aren't you?
I never strongly disliked unions. I just didn't have access to one and didn't see the point in going out of my way to join one.
Mm-hmm. Now you have one.
Yes, and I prefer having it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're good.
Hosh was
Even
turned into
the
patisserie
even the
tins.
American unions, which are typically weaker than their European cousins.
Mm.
Hmm.
Unless they're just fronts for organised crime, from what I can tell.
Those are the Teamsters.
Yeah. Which I'm not quite sure what a Teamster would be in this country, is it? Yes,
They'd
I'm
be
really
a
not
truck
sure.
driver.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the truck drivers.
And in
Ah.
the UK, in the nicest way, the truck drivers union in the UK is interesting.
Mm.
Mostly in its weakness.
Yeah,
did-
although when they're...
Yeah. How did the flaw in the F4B Phantom 2 ejector get past USN for so long? The flaw was if the Rio, sort of the officer in the back, bails and the canopy is on a circuit breaker, in the ejector stops the pilot from bailing. Honestly, because believe it or not, you don't do that many ejections, and it worked in simulations, it worked in testing. It didn't work under certain conditions if things weren't set up perfectly.
And it's not just the
you
US
don't-
that's immune
and
to
believe it or not, this is the thing: this was the period where ejection seats, because the ejection seat was considered mature technology, and the ejection seat, the Martin Baker seat, worked well. It's kind of the classic thing with some of the interwar testing on various weapon systems. It worked under the scenarios they were expecting. They were expecting to operate it under. None of them thought to test the idea of what happens under scenarios we're not expecting, and then they found out it had issues.
Yep. And I will also point out that when it comes to
Yep.
missing things that seem obvious in hindsight, this is not merely a US problem. Every Air Force has pretty much had shenanigans occur like this.
Every Air Force,
if
every
unfortunate-
Navy, every Army.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just something the US should get flack for
I
missing
would
this.
say,
It's just...
though, I did recently, this week, get to let out my I told you so dance, and I feel I should show this to you so you all know it for the full effect that it had on the people involved. So,
I'm getting my blindfold.
so this is my I told you so dance, which
I'm
might
enlarging
have
the
done
screen.
to a former member of the British Army who had informed me that we were not going to need to keep any old Challengers in reserve for possible upgrade future reference because you would never need them. I told you so! 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 Which was fun.
Dr. Alex, friend, buddy.
Look,
We've known each other. We've known each other for
Mate.
for about a year now. But please, for the love of all that is holy.
I have never done that to you. I strictly reserve it for 2-star officers who have told me that I was going to be wrong.
Did
In
anyone else get
his defense, he then did buy my dinner.
Did anyone else get 1995 lost footage vibes from that?
Yeah.
Sort of like that, like something you've seen in analog horror before, like a monster appears behind him and eats him.
Oh no, the thing is, it's before I turn into the monster and eat everyone else.
Ah, the thing, classic.
Yeah. Alright, next question. Michael Cooch, you have the ability to go back at any point in history and change one, but only one, naval-related policy or procurement decision. When, what do you choose, and what results would you expect?
Oh, that's really, really, really easy. If I may go first, because mine's
Yes,
fairly
you can go
obvious.
first.
I'm hopping in the time machine. I'm going back to whoever first proposed the idea of the Je ne Cole, and I am removing it from history forever. There will be a proper French capital ship construction program. There will be no gaps. There will be no infrastructure lag, and we will be the second nation to build dreadnoughts after the British.
Okay.
I'm done.
Dr. Dan.
The decision to not maintain a fleet air arm in the Royal Navy with the formation of the RAF. I mean, you could just go whole hog and say the formation of the RAF, but that seems a little harsh because it's had its uses. Yeah, I think that would be my one.
Apologies for going all apocalypse mad on you all there.
That's fine. I've already shown them my Toiduso dance. Foxo.
It's gonna. I don't know the validity of it, but it's repeatedly reminding the fleet air arm that one aircraft can't do every job, and trying to get rid of the policy that means they try to do everything with one aircraft.
But it's
Yes,
logistically
all
so beautiful.
Look, the fairy swordfish TSR can do everything, including act as a fighter, provided it's up against things that probably predate the Sopwith Camel.
Like,
Or an ME 109, which overshoots
Justice
it
for
and
the
doesn't realise
former.
it has machine guns behind it.
Justice for the former, justice for the firebrand. They shouldn't have tried to make them strike aircraft as well as fighters.
No.
I think the full Mars should have just been a fighter, which I agree. But I think the Firebrand should have leaned into the whole this is a strike aircraft, that's what it does, rather than trying to make it a fighter as well. Because the Firebrand's carrying capacity was fairly impressive.
But that was that was when it came late for the World War fleet.
Yeah, it could have been a very good fight to have early on. Runon.
I would like to go back into the past to the officer or officers in the U.S. Navy who decided that they did not need to do full scope testing on the Mark 6 exploder. And I would like to alter the circumstances so that full scope of testing on the Mark 6 exploder is committed. What does the alteration of those circumstances look like? Don't know. I'll figure that out when I get there. But the Mark 6 exploder will get the full scope of testing.
Ruinon is not messing around.
I'm allowed to change one thing. Now, the temptation for me is to go back in time and make sure the Admiral class, especially HMS Howe, is completed as an aircraft carrier. However, I actually think there's something I could do which is going to be even cooler than that. Because whilst having an Admiral class carrier and having those Admiral class completed as carriers, if I got all three completed as carriers, would be an amazing thing, and I could get that done before the war ended. Or rather, close enough they'd be finished off soon after the war, so they'd be grandfathered into the treaty. Like Hood. There is something else I can do, which could have equally long-term effects. And so, we've had quite a naval aviation heavy. So I'm going to go, again, it's Anglo-centric, I do admit that, but in the nicest way, I'm British, so I can play that card occasionally. I'm going to, instead of going for the Nelrod design, I'm going to do a fast battleship based off the F3 design with the 15-inch 50. and carry on using the 15-inch shells. So I'm not going to have the 16-inch shell issue, and all those shells issues that the poor Nelson Rodney had and had to deal with. And B, I'm going to have 15-inch 50s in construction and production, which means I'm probably going to start upgrading program on my other vessels as soon as I can. And that means more than likely when it comes to World War II, even if we get in the scenario where we've originally selected 14-inch for the King George V's, if you have such an ongoing 15-inch upgrade program, it means you've got the 15-inch 50 sitting there. It means you just go, frigate, so okay, we're going to 9 15-inch guns. Instead, if we can't do 12 14-inch, and if we can't get what we want, we just go in 9 15-inch guns. And at which point the King George V's come into service and their guns probably work. Their guns will work, and their shells will work and everything, and that'll make it so much of the process getting. And it's just the consequences it has just are immense. And it also means you have 2 more fast ships in the Royal Navy fleet to share the burden about at the beginning of World War II. And they're decent fast ships, because let's be honest, the F3 is a good design. Okay.
I do like the F3.
Mm-hmm.
I do like that. I mean, the other thing that it might be worth trying to tell somebody is the Royal Navy decision makers in the 20s and 30s, please stop trying to get away with a cut price cruiser. It's a false economy.
The Royal Navy does the designs to try and show the politicians they're a false economy. Unfortunately, their bluff gets called on the counties. The Arrow fusers are not cut price cruisers. Once you look at the Arrow fusers and look below them, you realise, whilst they are the smallest cruiser hull you can build, it's still an effective cruiser hull. They aren't cut price.
Oh no, they're not. But the Crown Colony class are.
Crown Colony, yes. Well, no. Crown Colonies are war-build towns. They're basically the town class design with everything stripped out from that you need for longer term, so you can crank out as many of them as you can quickly.
I'd argue I'm not sure that the savings were as good as
you have to remember when they're being ordered. The Royal Navy's planning on war in 1942 onwards. So Crown Colonies, they could have crowned out as many as they could, and replaced put a healthy number of new ships in service as quickly.
But were they really that much faster to build than a town?
It dropped 4 months off the build time.
Really?
That's the plan. It dropped 4 months off the build time.
Because the reality is it didn't, but that was because they got the building all got interrupted by the war. But
no, it's because the building got interrupted by Churchill.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Well, Churchill only became first naval lord because of the war, so.
Yes, but he didn't. In the nicest way, he didn't have to pause these things. He does it entirely off his own back, and then tells the rest of the government he's done it.
Yes, it's. Yeah, basically, I would have just liked them to have continued cranking out the Belfast, Edinburgh type. Just continue, rather than going smaller.
Well, ex-Submariner, as I've talked about before, and this sometimes seems to make Americans think I'm being rude about them. I'm not. I'm being rude. If anything, I'm being rude about the Bureau of Ordnance, but that's about it. The Royal Navy has an advantage when it comes to their torpedo testing. They literally work around the world. And they're firing fish all over the world. And they do test. And one of the good things about the Royal Navy in the interwar years is that in the 1920s and 30s, whilst they are dealing with government cuts and other things, they have a functionally limitless training and exercise budget. Once you look into it. It's a functionally limitless training and exercise budget. And they use that. And they test all these things massively.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that the Royal Navy, the world's premier navy for the majority of its for the majority of the 1900s, was saying that it had unlimited training so that its crew were competent?
Yeah. They basically ran the budget as much as they could, so they functionally always had, and they always had more than enough fuel to do training and more than enough shells, etc. Because okay, we need to do live fire testing. Oh, that's great. We can do live firing. We've got all these shells that are going to pass their sell-by date. We'll use them.
Yeah, my shells are about to expire. No, now they are about to explode.
Yeah.
There's one thing that I am reminded of constantly through one of my other loves, which is the Spanish Navy prior to the Spanish Civil War. A fairly competent force that usually had a decent amount of metal in it, but it always, well, at least prior to World War One, always seemed to have the problem of, so we've got the metal, and we've got the men. Now, are we going to test them, or exercise them, or do anything other than have them sit in harbour? No.
No.
Right. Okay then.
Now, next question then. Seneca Nero. In the 1970s, instead of becoming a museum ship where Belfast is now, there is a public donation campaign to refit HMS Leviathan again. It gathers enough money to refit it how you want. How is this? Isn't that the ship from World of Warships?
No,
this is
the X. It's the artist formerly known as SS Great Eastern. By this point, she's a carrier with an eagle-like superstructure and a single massive hangar deck. This is her fourth. This will be her fifth refit.
This is Drax's April Fool's video, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, you let it die. At that age, it's basically it's a ship of Theseus. It's no longer the original ship. It needs to go somewhere and quietly die.
Which in this case is into the museum.
Yes.
Do you want to know? So if I've gathered enough money to refit it how I want it, given that how I want it would be a Catabar carrier, I'm going to use the money since the cost to do that would be the cost of 2 CVA-01s, and I'm going to order 2 CVA-01s.
Yeah.
Hey,
Wait, just
hang on.
give me two.
Stop. Dr.
Uh,
Clarke, can you change the banner on the
Already done.
screen, please?
Questions will go live again later. Don't worry. We'll get through them.
Is it bad? I'm tempted to see. Just checking when the Aegis system was developed. Can I outfit it with an Aegis? Yeah, I want it. It's 1970s. I want to refit it with an Aegis system and a load of VLS cells.
The problem is, no. Well, first of all, it's the 70s. That's a bit early for Aegis, and especially early for VLS.
Okay, so ARM.
Sea Dart. You basically want all the Sea Dart then.
I want all the Sea Dart, and I want lots of radars, and I've just invented the missile farm.
Why?
Well, no,
Tell
you've
me the
invented.
NHS.
You've invented a large air defense warship, I'll grant you that, but it's very much a one-trick pony, and it's not got the reach of... Honestly, at that point, the best thing you could do is buy the remaining stocks of Talos from the Americans, and just go, yes, telegraph pole of doom be upon you. It's an old missile, but it still hits like a brick.
But it would break up the Soviet large air attacks, because the big limiting factor was always the number of directors you could fit.
Hey, Gorbin.
With that much ship, I can have quite a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so I can actually have quite a lot of missiles in the air.
Well, I suppose at least you're not doing what people I keep seeing people suggesting. Oh, we've got to cover the Queen Elizabeth class and HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales with VLS with missiles. And you sit there and go, well, whilst I would like to have some air defense on some improved air defense on those ships, I also don't want a load of FOD. for the aircraft taking off and landing.
I'll take a
that's
few
actually more of a
guns-
difficult thing to deal with on a Vistol carrier than it is on a Cadabar carrier. Does anyone want to guess why?
Mm-hmm.
Vistol aircraft
Because
can land multiple different places along the deck.
yep.
Which means your dangerous areas where FOD can get drawn into an engine and cause you to lose an aircraft and lose a pilot and maybe damage your carriers if it's coming down the wrong point, it is quite large. Now, if you've got sponsons and you can put it out at an angle, then maybe it's sensible. But there's a reason why the Americans haven't gone for it. There's a reason why the nations which have gone for it have been very careful about where they've put it, and it does create a dead space on the flight deck.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The mod team has asked me to inform you, Dr. Clarke, that Dan and Fleet are still quite loud, while you and I are quite quiet.
I have no idea why I'm
So
Don't know. But thank you for the heads up.
Dan and Fleet both quite loud. Okay, Dan's at 50%.
Maybe 40?
Fleet's at 50% now.
hello, it's me.
You are Runon. You're at 80%. Should I put you up to 90%?
Good. I'm 125% of what was needed. That's fantastic.
Please also know it was me
Foxos-
suggesting a 1970s ship with VLS and Aegis. The first Aegis
90%.
demonstration system went to sea in 73, but VLS took longer to develop. I would not be using the ship as a carrier anymore. Although she could have helicopters on her for
Yeah.
ASW. Oh, that would be a point. You could keep chunks of her as an ASW helicopter, as an ASW.
You're not turning her into a large, a Great Eastern version of Moskva. Knight 6831.
She's
If
not.
the original,
She's a super destroyer,
no,
but she's the star of
Dad,
the show.
quit-
so she's
no,
Dad,
no,
quit while you're
just
ahead.
move on.
Quit while
moving
you're
on,
ahead.
Moving on. Knight 6831.
No.
If the original timeline Sea Venom design ended up becoming the Sea Vampire, then what would become the Sea Venom? Lord only knows.
I'm struggling to
Because
wrap my head around that one.
You've changed the Sea Venom to the Sea Vampire, so that it's the previous design. So as the designs are evolutionary based on experience, but also reflective of the technology available, the design which historically comes next wouldn't be quite viable at that point. So it's going to be something else, but who knows what, because you've changed the entire basis of evolution, basis point of evolution.
You're probably looking at some form of interim design. In
Well,
fact, you might have
no,
some. You
no,
might honestly. You
Fleet,
might have.
There's only an interim design. If you know what's coming next, you don't.
Yeah.
But the historical thing is Venom,
Vixen is the third one. I was just
Venom Venom Vampire Vixen.
Yeah.
But you're not getting Vixen early
No.
No,
because
so
she's limited by Red Top, isn't she? And you're not rushing Red Top.
So you're going to have something come in between, but who knows what it's going to be.
I mean, well, the funny thing is.
I mean, the name is going to start with a V.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, I reckon
VTR?
given, I'm actually going to disagree with Foxo. I think given Vixen's aerodynamics
Dangerous choice.
and its flight choices, and its introduction into service, I can see some form of proto-Sea Vixen emerging, but as very much the last gunfighter of the fleet air arm. So it will look like a Sea Vixen, look like a Sea Vixen, walk like a Sea Vixen, talk like a Sea Vixen, but it'll be a traditional fleet interceptor with guns and And then later on, you might have a Sea Vixen 2, which is what we would know as the Sea Vixen, which trades it's same airframe, but it's what we would recognize as Sea Vixen with no guns and purely missiles.
There's just one issue with that fleet. It's that From what I've read, the Sea Vixen, one of the reasons why it's such an odd shape and an ugly duckling of an aircraft is the sacrifices they made to get the missiles working on it. Because I remember correctly, the internal systems needed for the radars on it is why the pilot's offset. So if you remove potentially most of the radars,
Okay.
so it's operating as a conventional gunfighter, you've got a completely different aircraft.
Okay.
I mean,
Before
basically
anyone
what we've got
carries
is the
on,
DH-110.
I'm going to end this question because Stafford has just committed a war crime against all of us by suggesting it would be the Vauxhall. So I think we are moving from this question as quickly as we possibly can. I
Isn't it
have
the
had a
Meteor?
Vauxhall. It's my first car, but no one's calling something the Sea Vauxhall. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Would the Lusitania have been hit by a torpedo if she had been running at a full speed instead of slower speed she was going? It would have been a lot harder to hit her.
But there's no reason that.
Would there have been?
Yeah, because if you consider they're not doing it with fire, they don't have fire control. So they are literally doing it by sight. So if you're going faster and you're zigzagging, then the odds are you're going to be more difficult for you to be hit.
Well, wasn't she sailing straight though?
Yeah, but even if you're sailing straight, if you're going faster, it does make it more difficult for them to do the times to hit you.
Let me see. When was how?
I thought it would just
I'm
be
just
they
trying
put
to
slightly
see.
more lead on the torpedo. But
Yes, but you also
Possible.
remember the torpedoes aren't as fast as the later ones are. We're talking about. We're talking about World War One torpedoes and their speeds. So
it's not.
their window of interception goes down if you're going faster.
Yeah,
but
it's
just to check,
possibility.
Cat can hear us, right? Because I know
Yeah.
I'm very quiet still.
It's
We can
it's
say.
absolutely it's absolutely a possibility she could still be hit, and if she is hit at speed, she'll go down even faster.
Yes.
But it will be a more difficult shot. But it is entirely possible.
It's still possible she's going to be hit, but it's going to make it a lot more difficult.
Yeah. What I will say is I don't have any indication on exactly how fast she was running at the time of her sinking. I'm trying to find out how fast she was actually going.
I think she was going at an economical speed rather than her maximum speed.
So about 21 knots then. Because flat out she'll do 24, I think, was the Lusitania flat out.
Okay. Can I just say that people are carrying on with the Sea Vauxhall, and that is disturbing me to a level which we must say. And I think it's all very good. You can't see either Dan or Fleet's faces because they'll be truly traumatized. Truly traumatized.
They weren't traumatized as soon as they logged on. This is amateur hour.
Although me and Dan had a pretty cool week. This is the advantage of me actually going and working up in London for a week. I get to see the shipshape crew. And me and Dan discovered a Korean barbecue place in Rains Park, which is really, really nice. Really nice.
Let me know if you find a good Tex-Mex place or vague UK equivalent.
Yeah, there's a couple in. For some reason, there's quite a lot of Mexican Texans have decided to set up restaurants in Cornwall. I have no idea why.
I'm going to keep pestering you about that one opportunity that you allege exists.
It does exist, and I've been chatting with them. I had a chat with them today, actually.
Chat harder. This billet's only scheduled to be in existence for another 2 months.
Okay. Colin Cameron, I've just read all Glyn's Castle Federation books. I was just wondering, which of the two doctrines do you prefer in the universe? Battleships plus fleet, or every ship as a carrier? Honestly, as I've talked about before, when I'm doing the sci-fi fleet, mine is usually every ship is a carrier of some. Every ship is a sort of a carrier and a battleship to an extent. I think parasite craft are a very sensible addition for any vessel going into space combat because I think the thing you can really don't want to do is stick your own your primary vessel anywhere near the enemy if you can avoid it. So having anything which can offload the fighting to parasite craft, to uncrewed assets, all these things is a sensible thing. Now the thing is, in space though, I can also see why you might well end up that whilst the desire is always to have uncrewed assets, possibly to minimize the threat to crew. I think you could end up with crewed assets being the way for parasite craft and these things to go, literally because of the distances involved and time it takes for the communication. Because even the speed of light is not instantaneous at the distances you're talking about for likely space in space-based combat. So yeah, I think you will have probably crewed assets doing the parasite work.
Because I think it's one of the things that goes with it's going to be ships in space, not kind of aircraft, which is why they're going to have the ships, boats equivalents and things.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're going to offload because for what you need on what you want on a combat craft is that it kind of breaks away from the bit which has got all the logistics and the slow bits. Basically, it's the same kind of idea as kind of, I don't know, having a air-to-air refueling aircraft rather than making your aircraft so big it's its own air refueling thing. You know, you don't take those bits back. You know, you don't take those bits into combat, but you also, don't want to live on the pure combat ship. No, I think it makes good sense, and yeah, it's the decision making loop. I just worry. I mean, the only thing I guess the question is, could you expect an AI or computer systems to be able to make the decisions in combat instead of needing a person there? And that one's hard.
To what extent do you trust them without having the ability to have a kill switch involved?
I mean, we're up to Skynet 6.
Yes, but Britain is interesting, and honestly, is probably scaring most people most people who are sensible around the world with the fact that I'm actually surprised, considering the range of issues which various President Trump has been focusing on. I'm surprised he hasn't brought up Skynet 6, and this is not a political point at all. I'm just surprised. Consider that it hasn't been brought up in some discussions about UK defence policy, that we still name our communication systems the Skynet system. Considering the thing that goes with that name, I'm just surprised.
I will have no formal comment on that. However, I will say regarding AI systems in space, I like the Lost Fleet philosophy of any AI system which is smart enough to operate independently with a light speed delay is too smart to trust. Any system which is dumb enough to trust is not smart enough to operate independently.
That is pretty much true.
That makes a good degree of sense, but I'm just, because I was thinking that the same stuff you have to worry about with a computer in terms of hardening it against radiation, everything. You have to do the same thing for your humans, because apparently we don't react particularly well to radiation and extremes of heat and cold and being exposed to hard vacuum or all those sorts of things.
You do surprise me. Anyone would think we'd evolved on a planet which had had a nice magnetic field and ozone layer and all sorts of things that protected us from some of these items.
Dr. Dan, are you insinuating that we are squidgy organic bits and not immortal death machines of persistent hunting terror?
We're both.
To be fair, we shouldn't probably bring that up with Fleet here because Fleet has plans for that.
I mean,
I am concerned that
can I just say something about the question quickly?
I was
Yes.
actually away for 2 minutes. All I come back to is Fleet has plans.
So,
What did I miss?
everything.
I think it's hard to make generalized statements on sci-fi fleet doctrines.
Hmm.
It very much depends on what's the tech level.
And the context
Like-
of setting.
Yeah, like, because you wouldn't tell a fleet to operate like a modern carrier battle group if they're running around with ships of the line, would you?
No.
And it's like, if you have superluminal weapons, how does that change fleet combat?
Mm-hmm.
If you have, say, I don't know, missiles that can teleport or go to FTL, how does that affect things? I don't watch that. But yeah,
I would be far more intrigued to see what does superluminal sensors and by extension superluminal communications do. Because usually if you have the one, you'll have the other, even if it's a simple, air quotes, tachyon Morse
Yeah.
type system.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but it's like, I can't remember what book it is. But there's a sci-fi book that's really well where spaceships don't exist because it's a saying that uses real space FTL. So people just chuck rocks at each other. Because there's few things that can survive light speed rock.
I could take it.
Oh dear.
I'm reminded the fact that we have two electricians here, and that's always a scary mix. But no, Fleet, I was basically
Who?
saying that you have plans for
Wait,
making
who's the other
fusing
electricians?
humans and machines.
Oh yes, thank you. Yes, but no more spoilers than that.
No.
But if you're saying that Foxo is the other electrician, she's the electronics technician, which is black magic sorcery, which I have no understanding of.
We have already worked out that she is a higher life form. We've already agreed this, Runon. Than all of us.
Do you see me contesting that?
No.
Are you telling me that you wouldn't play with chipsets in your spare time?
I would play with them. They wouldn't exist for very long, but I would play with them.
I mean, I eat chips.
Not those kind of chips.
Okay.
Okay.
Like, when your components are measured in nanometers, I think you're a bit out of Rui's wheelhouse.
If they're measured in nanometers, I'm going to need a lot of them if I'm going to eat them.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, mechatronics.
Next
Petch gets it.
question. Before we go further down the eating chips route, Nightwolf F112. Why did the Navy why did the Navy since World stop using stern torpedoes on their submarines?
I think he
Why
means
did
since World
navies
War
of
II.
the world stop using stern torpedoes on their submarines?
Because after you,
Yeah, thank you. Fundamentally, the need for them went away.
Yeah, fundamentally, you can redirect a torpedo.
Yeah, you can redirect the torpedo, and also there's more important stuff that needs to go at the back of a modern submarine, specifically the total ray sonar.
No,
And I would also say that I would also posit that because power densities got so much higher, the requirements for them got so much higher, you had to sacrifice more of your aft space to the engineering plant, so you ran out of room for the apparatus you need to launch torpedoes.
I mean, they went surprisingly. They were present surprisingly recently. The O-class submarines that were in service till the 80s had stern torpedo tubes. Because I remember chatting to the going round crud, whichever one it was in Sydney, and they used them because they didn't
Right.
actually have torpedoes that fitted anymore. Their principal use was for the storage of beer at a good temperature, so that the tinnies didn't get too warm.
I mean, the thing with the
To be
O-boats is
fair,
that they are.
if you put it out too much, that's going to be a reason why navies might actually re-implement them.
Yeah, the thing with the O-boats was basically the fact that they just lasted a long time.
Okay, wait a minute. I feel like I need to call more attention to this. What you're saying is that the Australians, when faced with an outmoded system, their first thought was, how can we
Beer.
make this contain intoxicants?
Yes.
Yep, that's the Aussies in a nutshell.
These are the
don't
people
know how I
who
feel
had
about
who had regular barbecues on their submarine.
While it was underwater.
I believe they would normally surface.
They did a
I'm
few
not sure
ones.
what their plan is for dealing with this when they are, when they get nuke boats, which don't need to surface at all. I don't know what, and I don't know how they've adapted with the Collinses, which largely don't need to surface.
As the nuke boats will be new and a unknown setup for the Aussies, they will probably claim something like a mid patrol inspection stop, requiring them to surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And while they're at it, they might as well have a crew swim and a barbecue, because
Right.
they're Australians. That's apparently what they
Yep.
do.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Finns will have a sauna on anything they produce, down to armored fighting vehicles. I assume that they just scale up the boiling vessel that you'd get in a British armored vehicle.
What you tell me is that every nation has its own idiosyncrasies.
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah. Who'd have
No.
thunk?
But it's known. World War II era ships or classes do you think didn't need built, and what ones do you think should have been built? Which World War II era ships or classes do you think didn't need to be built, and which ones do you think should have been built? Ooh.
That's it's really hard to I'm for any of the belligerents, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm struggling to think of any assets they constructed or attempted to construct that there wasn't a need for.
Could I say
Atlantis.
there is something
gonna-
I can put forward as an idea, but it's going to be mildly controversial.
Can I put one forward first?
Go on, Foxo.
The weapon class. The one between.
I can actually I can show you actually the need for that one.
Really?
Yeah,
I
because
thought there was some in there.
I covered it in my book.
Okay, 'cause they just sort of seem to fit in the area of too late to be needed, but too little to be useful post-war.
Well, the thing
No,
is, that's
they
not
were
really a fault of the
hostile.
ships
They're
themselves,
real.
is it? Because they the war ended, but nobody knew the war was going to end.
And to be fair, they were built to take advantage of the yards, which could build something bigger than the seas. And they were more UFR than the seas, but they weren't the same level of fighting power as the battles. Basically, they were attempt to build an intermediate destroyer between the seas and the battles. And they do make sense, because it's trying to sort of make as efficient use of the yard space as possible to get as powerful AA armed battle destroyers into the fleet for the invasion of Japan as possible. Now, here's the thing. I
can think of one.
Okay.
Go on.
Fleet.
Escort carriers that move beyond merchant hull forms. So any of the escort carriers the Allies or the Americans built from 44 onwards that were very much less, they sort of moved beyond their original design brief. You've already got the swarms in country already, in being commissioned. You've lengthened the build time on the ships for not much appreciable gain in speed or flight ops, and you're sort of moving to create a role that doesn't need, like, a fast escort carrier. Why do you need a fast escort carrier But even then, I can still see roles for them. But if I have to cherry pick something, I'm going to have not be built. That's a fairly safe option.
They didn't build. I was literally just looking through all the stuff about the different kind of escort carriers and things. Are you thinking of the Casablanca class? Because those were just using the same hull form as the T3 tankers. That was a hull form that they already had. They didn't go out and design something new. They just went back to a design.
No, I'm talking about the commencement bays. Because yes, they're based on the T3 tanker hull, but they edited it, they altered it. It's not the Casablancas, it's the commencement bays that followed them.
I think the biggest mistake was probably the Independence class light carriers.
They gave you vital hulls in the water when you needed hulls in the water.
They could have done with the Optimus cruiser hulls as well. That's the thing. And
So would they be the fleet carriers 1944s then?
Well,
I think we should let Dr. Clarke say what he's got to say.
My one is I would delete the Audacious class and just build mortars. Because there is a nicest way when you're building them. There's got pretty much the same timeline. You're already scrapping Audaciouses to build mortars anyway. Why build any more Audaciouses? Why not build them all as mortars? And think if they had done that, then Eagle and Ark Royal would have been mortar hulls.
There is also one other thing that I would say, which is this is my the one I did previously was just removing, but moving on to the second part of the question, which is remove and replace, I'm going to do something that Dr. Clarke knows full well, which is Fleet's Bismarck, which is where you basically hit the Germans over the head with a sledgehammer, say, the design team that gave us the Scharnhorsts is now going to give us the Bismarcks, and we're going to let them cook.
Yeah. Although the amount of people who turn around to me and go, you know what, the Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, they're battle cruisers because the Germans chose the 11-inch gun for them. You go, no, the only option that was available at the time for them was the 11-inch gun. They didn't have anything else ready.
And also politely,
if they wanted a different gun, they'd have had to wait years.
Yeah, and also politely, have people not checked the specs for the performance characteristics of that 11-inch gun? It's ridiculous.
And also, the thing is, they have the subdivision, they have the hull density, they're fast battleships, they're not battlecruisers.
They are. They absolutely are. But again, it's basically what Bismarck will probably be is, as I've said before, it has become a bit of a meme now on my channel, Scharnhorst Extendo, 4th barbette in, 11-inch guns out, 15-inch in, done.
Yes, and it works. And it does work.
It's probably also cheaper to construct and might be out slightly faster. Heck, you might even be able to slap a third hull in if you want to.
My two submissions are going to be ditch the Atlantas, build the Montanas.
Ooh, that is an interesting pick, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be frank, the Atlantas are very top heavy. Yes, they bring a lot of 5-inch 38s, which is a good AA field, but they're very top heavy, and it's a lot of AA concentrated in one spot.
They also don't get used in their role as destroyer leaders in the war. They get used as pocket cruisers more often than not, and whenever they get used like that, they get slapped.
Michael Coach, we're not allowing the figures 14-inch salesman to visit Germany in the 30s. I'm fairly certain there was a British agent waiting at every single port of entry into Germany in the 1930s, and if they saw the Vickers 14-inch salesman anywhere near entering them, they were to take them out with a single shot to the head.
I thought that was the Vickers salesman's wife.
And also politely, the Vickers salesman's already happy. The British are using 14-inch guns. They may not be using They may not be using Vickers 14s, but Vickers is getting some of the contracts for the barrels, I believe.
Wait, it's Vickers.
Well,
if there is a gun being produced on the planet that is not made by them, they will forever be unhappy.
To be fair, they had the monopoly on gun mount building.
Yeah, Vickers are trying to emulate Standard Oil at times.
No, Standard Oil is trying to emulate Vickers at times.
I was saying that because Vickers managed to and Oil managed to get their monopoly.
Well, for all of 5 minutes until Teddy came along and went, yes, hammer time.
In 15
Look,
years.
no, sorry, they are all trying to emulate the original monopoly called the East India Company.
Yeah.
And none of them worked out. So the way to be truly as powerful as the East India Company is, of course, to be able to have your security force double as a private army.
You mean you think companies shouldn't have their own subcontinents?
No, and they shouldn't have their own armed
Which-
forces.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have an air force.
But they did
Actually,
have a
they
navy.
They did actually have an air force. They had a balloon section.
Oh God.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry, they had a siege balloon section.
Yeah. Right. So, we should probably. I think I hit that question
Can I
over there.
give
with
my
Emma.
answer? Sad.
I thought you already
question.
did, but
Carry on.
I only gave out the first part of the question.
oh, okay. Go nuts.
It's gonna sound strange. Kind of is. But replace the Shimikazes with something else. A more anti-air focused destroyer, because as I read it, the Shimikazes are sort of, forgive me if I'm wrong, but they're essentially obsolete on launch with their design philosophy. Because there isn't,
Yep.
does the role they were designed to fill really exist anymore?
There's an
Of the
argument
large top primary, because they're like 3,000 tons plus, aren't they?
You have to remember, they are designed when the Japanese... I often try to explain to people, the Japanese have an attrition policy, but that's going to lead up to the decisive battle. And the whole point is they are supposed to be getting the enemy to do something stupid to wear themselves out. Like the Russians running around the world to come and fight the Japanese with what they have available. They want to try and get the Americans or Brits to do the same thing. And they want to be able to trick them.
Who's eating their mic?
But it just
What is
seemed
that?
like the shimmer, like stuff like the Fubukis and is it the Yudachi?
Mm-hmm.
I can sort of see, because even for a destroyer of the time, they've got quite a heavy torpedo load. But
Yeah.
it's just the Shimakaze seem like it's excessive when you're putting so many eggs on one basket.
Oh, yeah. But this is the
And it's
Japanese.
not exactly a small target anymore.
Nope.
I would just I mean, just I don't know about what to replace it with, but maybe just modernize the Yudachi or something,
Mm-hmm.
because they seem to do well.
Stafford, the Hudson Bay Company weren't a arm of the East India Company. They were a preceding company. They are a preceding organization, and they lasted even longer. And everyone had quite a few, but as you noticed, they have recently filed for bankruptcy and are setting to liquidate. But honestly, again, have a look at them, and what you'll see they're actually going through is basically a rebranding. It seems to me. They're basically rebranding under a new name and new details, and it's all being done as a bankruptcy because probably that's tax shenanigans. Foxo's now so much louder than everyone else.
Probably because Foxo hasn't been talking for the majority of this live, so now that she has been talking, well, noise.
Yeah, so I'll just say some random words, and then you can get the volume right. It doesn't.
You could gush over Dragon.
He's my boyfriend. He's my partner.
Yeah.
I
Right.
could gush about him for years.
You could tell us things he really doesn't want to be made public.
He's recently got a new puppy.
Oh, cool.
Within 8 hours of having the puppy, it peed on his bed.
Only 8
They-
hours.
They tend to do that.
Seneca Nero, what is the refit for modern combat of the 1970s, and how does that refit influence the Falklands War? Well, you know the idea that the gun is gone and the missile is here. Have a look at all the modernizations and upgrades to ships, including various frigates which lose their guns, like HMS Phoebe, and get them replaced by missiles, and then get used as the first frigate to go into San Carlos Bay, and is sent the order: if enemy fire, engage with main gun. And at that point, the captain of the HMS Phoebe, if I remember correctly, I think it's Phoebe, looked over her deck and looked down and went, I don't have a main gun. I have some cannon. I have some machine guns. I have some Exocet missiles, if I remember correctly. I have no gun.
Is this HMS Phoebe being used as a single-use minesweeper?
Pretty much. The 22 Batch 3 did have the gun. Batch 1 and 2 didn't, Derek.
Honestly, the best way to make a lot of our own ships ready for the Falklands War is to give them even just manual or at least power operated bogus mounts.
It's what is the refit for modern combat on 1970s, and how does that refit influence the Falklands War? The big refit is the losing of guns, especially 4.5-inch guns for missiles, and then that causes issues in the Falklands War because they don't have enough guns, and because of the air defense situation in San Carlos Bay, where Michael Clarke basically went, well, I don't have enough seawolf ships to defend against Exocet if I want to sit in a place and deal with landing troops. So my only option is rock beats missile. So I will make sure I'm in a place which is surrounded by rocks. And that's basically the whole reason. People are regularly ask me, why was the landing area not devastated by the Exocet missiles? Why did the Argentines not destroy all the amphibious ships? And I go, literally, it's because it's surrounded by high rocks. They picked a good spot for geography. And that's the point.
It forced the Argentinians to come in.
Yeah.
With dumb ordnance.
Yes, which they didn't realise wasn't working until the BBC so helpfully told them that they were fusing their bombs incorrectly.
You win some, you lose some.
And recently someone tried to say, no, the Argentines worked it out. And they pointed out to an intelligence paper which pointed this out to the Argentinians and put in information. Unfortunately, that particular document is dated 24 hours later than the BBC report.
Oh,
so it kind of backs up that probably the source which informed them that the bombs weren't working and had them to work it out was the BBC report. Because the BBC believe that their primary duty in the world is to be an honest broker of information and to always provide honest information about events. The Royal Navy might not occasionally agree with the BBC on that front. They might like them to be a bit more creative, or just not to inform the world. You know, it's not even the BBC didn't have to lie and say the bombs were working. The BBC just didn't have to say why they weren't working or what the running theory was they'd heard from various personnel about why it wasn't working. They could have saved that for post-war analysis, but no, they put it out.
They may have been expecting to be, what's the word? Not allowed to broadcast it.
Yeah.
Be censored, to be fair. And frankly, you have to question why they weren't.
Because the UK government doesn't have real-time censoring.
The UK government needs to rethink that policy.
But also, there's the thing is, think about how would it work. It was going out on a live broadcast. No one has done a war with these. This is one of the interesting things about the Falklands War. It's the first war which is televised. And literally, you're getting... Sometimes governments are learning... Some members of government are learning what's going on in the war from the television broadcasts.
Wait, would it be the Falklands War? I thought that would be the Vietnam War.
No, they didn't have live TV for that.
There wasn't the
Did they
same level
not?
of satellite transmissions. They got television, they got broadcast back, but they weren't getting the same level of satellite information. And basically, the Falklands War is closer to First Gulf War reporting than people often think. People often think the First Gulf War was the first time that was massively, that sort of level of reporting was achieved. But no, there were quite a few periods in the Falklands War when they're getting to that level. The Vietnam War is the first televised war, where you see on television regularly on the nightly news. But the Falklands War is the first war where that footage can come back and can be recorded and will be on the air within hours of within single-digit hours,
Rather than having to fly the film rolls.
or
Which is what you used to have to do.
Black Horse, can you expand on what you meant by Rodney's hull getting cleaned and how often it was normally done? Normally, ships in peacetime will get their hull cleaned roughly every 18 months to 2 years as part of the normal dry docking process. Rodney Nelson seemed to get it done almost every 6 months during World War II.
So if you look at the Norman Friedman books about kind of battleship design and things, certainly for the British, when they're talking about performance characteristics, they're almost always talking about what's it able to do in kind of temperate waters 6 months out of dry dock.
Yeah.
Right, and so and with the assumption that things will degrade after that. So
yeah,
they're basically allowing that to keeping them in peak performance. It's like changing the tires on your F1 car almost more often than you need, so that you've always got the right kind and nice rubber.
Yeah, the British do all sorts of things to cover the performance characteristics of their ships, and one of them is the data they publish on them.
Yeah.
Nice, Aaron. Why do we not?
Around 30 knots.
Nice, Aaron. Why do we not know? Why do we not know what the plan was for the British colonies in Africa, Caribbean, Asia was? As the British were creating their 100-year plan, the decolonization plan, would be thinking of that. Honestly, we do, because the British have a sort of... It's kind of like when I talk about other things. You can have a plan without having a written down plan.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a standard form of operations. This is something which comes up, and I'll be talking about it when I eventually do a response video to all the comments on the Pearl Harbor video, because the amount of people who responded with, they had no plan for a third wave. My view is, well, they didn't have actually any plan beyond the first two waves. No, but that's because they don't need one. The first two waves we're sending these indefinitely, and what happens next is going to depend on the scenario. If you find your battleships and enemy battleships and carriers in there, then you send in another wave, and you also hit infrastructure if you can while you're there, because anything you do adds up, and the Japanese have a policy of destroying infrastructure if they can't capture it.
So we have the rough idea. We have the rough idea of what the British plan to do.
Fleet, I haven't finished yet.
Okay.
I know you want to jump in. But we do have a rough plan of idea, because there's a model which they start working on with what we would call the first dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And basically you can see that model goes by, first of all, they try and get local elections running. They try and get some sort of political thing functioning and embedded in. They want to then slowly turn the local police and local law enforcement over to the locals. and get that formalized, and then you slowly turn it over to take your own military out and turn them into a self-governing power in stages. And the reason you do it in stages is not because of sometimes the reason of, oh, it's race superiority. No. You have to remember, a colony is basically a dictatorship. A colony is a very brutal dictatorship in many ways because it's maintained by force. And if you don't want that colony to immediately descend into a dictatorship after you leave, and a brutal dictatorship, where might is right, and probably the factions you have spent time building up, i.e. the army and the police forces which have been supporting your power as a colonial power, taking over and ruling as form of dictatorship, you need to create the counterbalances of that. You need to strengthen the judiciary, you need to strengthen the politics. And you basically slowly withdraw your forces as they build up theirs, so there's never a power vacuum which a dictatorially inclined person can enter. And you have to remember, the dictatorially inclined person will probably do it out of good motives or see themselves as a hero, because they'll see there being a power vacuum, they'll see there's lawlessness, they'll be wanting to fix things, keep things stable, provide prosperity for all the good things. Unfortunately, dictators, no matter how nicely they start out, they always end the same way.
I mean, I'll be benign for a reasonably long period of time when I take over.
No, you won't be.
I will be.
Dan, in the nicest way, you will not be.
What I would say is that one of the things that we didn't get to see.
I love you dearly, Dan, but I've seen your reaction when you've been served a bad breakfast in a hotel.
Yeah. One of the things that we
will be humane.
One of the things that I think is up in the air is what the exact boundaries of these new Commonwealth states would be. Because whilst we know what we got historically, that was very much in a different context to how the British saw the decolonization plan actually proceeding. Would the boundaries be the administrative areas? Would they subdivide along ethnic or regional lines? Like would Malaysia be the Malaysian Federation, or would it be various different kingdoms, independent kingdoms? Would South Africa,
Malaysia would. It's going to be it's going to be based on the context and nuance of the situation. You have to remember the Malaysian Federation doesn't just come about because of decolonization. There was already been quite a history, especially during the period, and you have to remember Malaysia was quite far along in the process as well. Malaysia is further along in the process. They'd actually had the discussion of whether Singapore was going to be part of Malaysia or not. And that had been decided already a while back. So this is the thing. Malaysia's quite far along in the process. And it's one of the fun things is when you start looking around and you start going, well, hang on, there are some countries which are quite far along in the process. Another good example is, honestly, the Gold Coast, Sierra Leone. That was at a delicate point when it was done, but it was actually quite a while along the process. But the thing is, it was at a delicate point when it was done, and that's part of the problem. Please don't anyone think the British are doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They're not.
No.
But if you, in a nice way, from an economic trading perspective for the British, if you leave behind a stable country which is going to become a member of the Commonwealth, will keep being a viable trading partner, etc., that is the best thing for you. They want to get out of the empire business because they've gone from mercantilism, where you need to control everything, to capitalism, where you control the capital and investment. At which point, the empire is an expense you don't need. The reason the British are doing it, they want to do it the way they're doing it, though, the decolonization, is because, as the point of capitalism, if you have dictatorships, dictatorships aren't safe places to invest money, because dictators tend to be mercurial beasts you can't deal with. Whereas democracies, you tend to have a rule of law and tend to be safer bets for investing. So again,
it's also
this is why I find it funny when people go, oh, the British really didn't care. They don't care for good reasons. Grow up. They care because it's in their self-interest to care.
Yeah. It's all about creating a system of states tied together under British oversight. It's not so much
Not
like they're
British
creating stable
oversight. No, no,
environments.
no. British influence, not oversight. That's the
Mhm.
careful thing.
Uh-huh.
Oversight, people buck against. They
Mhm.
don't want to. Influence. Well, your friend.
Yeah.
Think about
You
it.
and I both know it's just oversight under a different name
No.
with a different setup.
Yes and no. It's not. It's not, because oversight is day-to-day control and minutiae. No, influence is. Oh, that's. I can see why you're doing that, but it's not really sensible. It's a
Sure
very
you want-
different cost scenario.
Oversight is there's a guy there with a gun watching you. Influences that guy's equipment is made elsewhere and he's paid elsewhere, but he's part of your group,
Hmm.
and he's technically working for you because it's
No,
that
he's
reminds me-
working with you, Foxo. With you.
yes. Because I remember correctly, one of the big things going back to the Africans, that's how they were doing it. 'Cause I think it's Kenya specifically. I remember in the specifics is
Mm.
they did a massive amount of economic reforms to actually diversify the economy from the exploitation of natural resources,
Yeah.
because the local government realized that if you have 1 to 2 revenue streams, you become very easy to become a dictatorship by seizing control of those streams. And the more diverse an economy is, the harder it is to become a dictator. Cough, Russia. But yeah, and sort of like a part of the reason Africa was going to take so long compared to, say, the White Dominions was because a lot of them were just, like Botswana specifically, was essentially a giant diamond mine.
Devo Bronk, I've done discussions on this in the past and talked through the economic situation, the reasons why the British and the economic situation they are in at the end of World War II, and when this with the colonization, decolonization, etc. going on. But it's there are many factors involved, but there are also many issues involved, and it was a very much a rushed system due to fear of communism, which actually led to communism in some places because it was rushed. But we'll leave that to one side.
You can blame America for a lot of it.
And you have to remember the British had started decolonizing the empire in the 1890s. The British start getting rid of the empire in the 1890s. It's one of the interesting things. People think the British do a rapid decolonization post World War II. The British had been decolonizing for 55 odd years by the time you get to, and in fact this is the fun thing, the British had actually started decolonizing and turning colonies into dominions and things like that before the British Empire reaches its peak in the 1920s with the protectorates and mandates. It's a whole fun scenario.
Yep.
Isn't that with the whole confederating thing to turn
Yeah.
them from colonies into dominions?
Yes.
So it's why you get Canada confederating. It's why you get Australia confederating. It's why New Zealand doesn't join Australia.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's shifting from empire to Commonwealth. Yeah, it's the amount of people who think that the Commonwealth just comes about magically, and you go, no, the British have been working on that idea, on putting it, shifting, creating Commonwealth for about 60 years. It had the idea started to come out in the 1880s. That's why the British succeed in forming a Commonwealth of their empire. Not rather than having the empire. Yeah, the British have been planning the decolonization for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
The point in the British Empire was it was flexible.
Yeah, the British Empire was a very interesting juxtaposition of empire sometimes. And that's not saying it's good. It's like sometimes when I talk about the Belgian Congo and how that is probably the worst, as the worst, most brutal empire the world has ever seen. People think that's excusing the British and French empires. It's not. It's just considering how bad the British and French empires were. They were both, those empires felt the Belgian Congo went too far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Imagine how far the Belgian Congo had to go to make the British and the French empires feel embarrassed about having an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about that. How bad do you have to be that those empires feel bad about it? That the Germans felt you went too far. The Germans, the British, the French, all felt... Even the Russians felt the Belgians went too far. How... This is the point of how bad that empire was. All these empires which we know were oppressive regimes all felt that empire went too far.
Yeah.
What's the famous name for the Belgian Congo? The Heart of Darkness?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize to break in with a complete non sequitur, but this is so ridiculous. I feel the need to highlight it. There's currently a Amazon delivery van sitting outside my house, made by Dodge.
Yeah.
Its backup alarm or parking alarm sounds as if someone is choking a crow.
Are you sure that's not one of the FBI vehicles which is being painted to look like an Amazon Prime delivery truck?
There's a difference.
Yes.
Yes, one
They have
has a
that- you
tell
one
which
has a
one's
worse
pit.
horn than the other.
No, it's not that. It's if it's parked like a complete bumhole, it's an Amazon van. If it's parked correctly and safely, it's FBI.
Yeah.
Don't joke about that, folks. So that is literally how you sometimes can tell if you're being tailed by something like that.
Yeah, it's like rural English roads and Amazon are a match made in hell.
Alt 92, yeah.
Stopped at rural English roads.
Alt 92, you are technically correct because the Belgian government even disowned it and said it was the personal property of the king. The Belgian government disowned it and it was their empire. Even the Belgian government disowned their own empire.
What's ironic is that they were always happy to take the money and the revenue from it.
Yes!
I mean, they might have morals, but, you know, they're not that strong, the morals. You know.
Okay, for this dude. What would have been the best way for the US Navy, assuming at least the modicum of cooperation from Congress, to handle the period after the Civil War?
To point large amounts of Dahlgren's finest products at Congress until it actually coughs up some money.
Basically,
well, it's assuming at least a modicum of cooperation from Congress. The best thing for them to do would be engage in a program of regular construction and replacement and maintaining a stable force.
The first thing they need to do is that all of the wooden warships that are not the latest and greatest that the USN has need to basically immediately go to the breakers to free up funding.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they need to do. Secondly, any monitor that is not rated for at least coastal sailing independently should probably also go to the breakers. Because at that point, you're no longer dealing with a navy. You're no longer dealing with an environment where those ships are useful. Because if you're fighting the British, you need to be able to at least independently sail your monitors to Canada to do blockade work up there.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, if they can't independently sail up the coast, they're basically useless to you.
And to be fair...
So at that point, if they can't independently sail up the coast, they're basically useless to you.
Yeah. And to be fair...
Secondly, you're probably looking at the U.S. development line starting out from new Ironsides rather than the monitors. They will probably go to you'll have a larger version of new Ironsides, then you'll probably have a central battery ironclad following on after that, and then you might see them try to blend the two styles with some form of ocean-going turret vessel in the late 1860s, early 1870s.
Yeah.
Something similar to Monarch.
I would say, for those wondering, the June-July patron suggestions is live. I've done it as a combined one because, honestly, and this, I know this is slightly off topic, but it's worthwhile bringing up now. The reason I've done it as a combined one, as I've seen them come in, is some people's video suggestions keep coming number 5, number 6, and so I thought if I did a combined one, which is 8, where the top 8 will get made, we'll see what comes through, we'll see what gets in, and it could be interesting. Yes, I do admit I'm slightly rigging the vote to see if some of those videos, those topics which consistently come number 5, number 6 when we're going for top 4, if some of them make it into the top 8 this time, because I think they come number 5, number 6 often enough that I think people obviously like them, but they never make enough to get to top 4. So I thought, well, if I combine June and July, it gives me a healthy jump on things that are going to be for August, September, and then October and November. And it also gives us a chance to sort of see whether any of those things make top 8. But it also means it's going to be a top 8 vote when it happens. So that's going to mean your votes are going to matter even more. So suggestions are open now, and they'll be open till next Sunday when I put the vote up next Sunday. And that'll be open for a week and for people to vote in. Okay?
Garden shed, garden shed, garden shed, garden shed.
I keep saying that topic is so massive that frankly I can't do that in a video. That's to be a series, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Year of the shed. Year of the shed. Year of the shed. Year of the shed.
Senekino, what is what is that refit for Modern Combat in the 1970s, and how does that? We've answered that one.
Yeah, did that.
Foxo, your favourite Azur Lane ship savant on all factions?
Favourite Azur Lane ships?
While Foxo's thinking that, I will say earlier, Fleet, I think you said the wrong thing. I think it was Fleet. It might have been Dan. Because you said nuts to Foxo, and Foxo's a fox, not a squirrel. So surely it should be rabbits.
Rabbits?
Yeah.
I have two votes so far for 3 votes for Year of the Shed. Jonathan Moon on Twitch, Petchington on YouTube, Dr. Dan on the panel, and hey, I'd vote for it too.
Okay, I'll add it to the list, but currently I've got lists built up for the next 10 years, so that means it's not coming back till 2037.
Oh, well, in that case, we can have Decade of the Shed. Decade of the Shed. Decade of the Shed.
No.
So to answer the question, Royal Navy, it's Foxhound Retrofit. Americans, it's... I'll get back to that one. Japan is Shinano. Look her up, it should be obvious. Discount China, I don't play them, I don't know. The French is Brest. The Italians is Michelangelo.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's so mad she almost summons literal god to the real world. Tempesta has to be Golden Hind because she's got the funniest voice lines. And for the Americans, it's going to be basic, but it's just because I love her character design. It's South Dakota because it's the only ship girl thing that has sort of the American states that are named after Native Americans have their name shaped ships be Native American, which I just find interesting.
That's a neat little detail.
What? Did I forget anyone? Oh, and Richelieu for the other French. And oh right, the Germans. know for the Germans.
No, you don't have to.
The Germans, they're not worth talking about in AL. They're all the poor edgelords.
All right.
So do you want next
And
question?
also, I think one of the things I do enjoy on ramblings is the amount of Azure Lane questions we get, and I think Fleet is slowly having to learn more by the sheer dint of the questions, so that he can better
Bold of you to
support his
assume that
audience.
Bold of you to assume I give in to peer pressure.
I don't assume you give in to peer pressure. I do assume your memory occasionally works.
Colin Cameron has a good point that given that now we are building ships in sheds.
Okay, let's put it this way. If I manage to get the permission to go and do some filming inside that shed and do a filming of it and use it as part of my talk about shipyards and the evolution of shipyards, I will also do a video about sheds and the dimensions from sheds, the top 5. How's that sound? If I get that combined,
it is acceptable.
Can we go up to Lake District and visit and just do something from outside the giant submarine building shed at Barrow?
Oh, I've already got running permission to go to that one. I'm waiting for the one for the Type 26 because I want to do both. And yeah, Dan, you probably will be called along as my cameraman.
Woohoo!
And Hitch?
Because believe it or not, out of the Shipshape crew, you're the easiest one to get the clearance.
That's because I've had clearance before. I mean, it wasn't very high.
It's also because you don't order random explosive chemicals off the internet.
I should be fairly easy to get clearance for.
Explosive chemicals off the internet in my own name.
Yes.
I should be fairly easy to get clearance for.
I think I used my brother. He won't get clearance. I can. Because he had everything on in his name.
I had confidential and classified clearance at one stage. Yeah.
Black Horse, what would have happened if only one aircraft carrier was able to make it to Midway on the US side? Well, this is actually
fundamentally an Midway doesn't happen.
Well, no, that's the thing. This is the interesting thing of. I was doing a video when I was doing the video about the strikes of the Pearl Harbor scenario. If they come over Pearl Harbor and there is no fleet there, then they're not going to fly back with their weapons. The first and second waves will engage the land targets. If they do that, they will hit the infrastructure. That will have an impact on their ability to repair things. Which would mean if you had a Midway Coral Sea scenario where you needed to repair a ship rapidly, you wouldn't be able to repair it in Pearl Harbor. You have to go back to America or Australia to be repaired. But if you'd come across it, if they come across it and found the aircraft carriers and the battleships all in Pearl Harbor and had attacked them, they would have then launched the follow-up waves, which would also still hit the infrastructure. And that would have made, as well as hitting the ships still in harbor to make sure they were sunk. That would be, again, devastating the infrastructure. Because realistically speaking, if the Japanese had gone against their doctrine and thinking of, if we don't know where the carriers are, we need to retain the aircraft aboard ships in case we find the carriers, rather surprisingly, and need to engage them, and had launched a successive wave to destroy infrastructure, i.e. like they did in China, when there was infrastructure they didn't wish to possess, they destroyed it, then that would have made Coral Sea and Midway not happen at all, because, well, Coral Sea might still happen, but Midway wouldn't, because they wouldn't be able to get the carriers there. And again, for US, if the Americans are only able to get one aircraft carrier to Midway, they can't really do anything with it. One carrier is not enough for that operation. They might still do it, but they're throwing away a carrier in its battle group.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that would be such a big change. You think about when those are happening, if the US don't have anything in the Pacific, are they going to be asking the Royal Navy to not hit Madagascar and things? And are they going to be offering things like Ranger to the for support the Med and things, or are they going to? So you could end up seeing.
What makes you think the British want the Ranger and the Med?
Well, Wasp in the Med, maybe Ranger in the North Sea. But you know, because you've potentially got such a changed strategic scenario there with no fight back capability. I just find myself wondering where that all goes.
Well, the thing is, under that scenario, there's no chance of leaving the Eastern. The British probably have to completely cripple the Mediterranean fleet, and possibly some of the North, definitely the home fleet won't have any carriers with it, because they will have to send those carriers to the Indian Ocean, and probably they'll have to send more fast battleships, more of their combat fleet as well, because it's just necessary. Because they made the Eastern Fleet on the calculation of the American Pacific Fleet existing.
Yeah. So I wonder. But it almost feels like it's too many butterflies to come up with a plausible thing. You can come up with some nice fiction about it.
Yeah.
But it's not. But it's getting to the stage of fiction, not what if.
Yeah, and it's like the interesting thing I have to say, and this is why I'm going to do a response video dedicated to the questions and comments on those videos, is because the sheer number of people who seem to be under the belief that even if there was no ships and nothing in Pearl Harbor, the Japanese would just not hit anything, they'd go home. No, they dropped their bombs. They dropped their bombs.
And they launched their torpedoes against the dry dock gates.
Yeah. That's what you do. The thing is, the Japanese aren't going to go, oh, we head home now. They're going to hit what's there. They have there is a difference between saying the carriers and battleships are their primary targets and that they're the only targets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, is you have an order of priority of your targeting list. That doesn't mean that means this is your your priority target. That doesn't mean you won't hit this. It means you want to hit this. You'll hit this if you got no other choice.
Also, I find myself thinking one of the reasons the Japanese wouldn't necessarily have written down what they'd send in a third wave is they were expecting more losses from the first and second waves.
Yeah.
So the reason you can't plan for your third wave is you don't know what damage you're going to have done, and you don't know what assets you're going to have.
No.
So you can try and come up with an idea, but
it's we have options. And the thing is, once you get the first wave back, and you know the carriers aren't in Pearl Harbor, you know they could be out there hunting you. And to be fair, that's not particularly wrong, considering the position of the carriers. They could have been out there hunting them. So at that point, you don't launch a second, or you don't launch a third wave. You're preparing for a carrier battle.
And I think the other issue, I guess, for that sort of scenario is when you say, oh, they didn't have a plan. It's like, no, they had professionals.
Yeah.
That's why you have people who've been doing this for literally decades in charge, because they can come up with this kind of stuff off very quickly, and they have a staff to help them to make it happen. We don't need to be coming up with a plan for literally everything. That's what you do in an academy. That's what you do in staff college. You know, so that you're prepared to be able to do this stuff on the fly when it counts.
Yeah.
That's why you have non-commissioned officers, essentially, in a land army.
Yeah.
Because you need some degree of tactical autonomy outside of the plan.
You need people who have experience to draw from, who can adapt. Now...
Yeah. Where that line is depends on your service, whether it's commissioned, non-commissioned, doesn't matter. It's that you have professionals, not just a bunch of amateurs.
Let me just answer the question. Hood and Bismarck's wet powder bags. Don't worry, you certainly haven't missed it all. We are. This is only 9:30. We started at 7:30. Usually, Bruships will go till about midnight.
Yeah,
And
we
of
have
course,
at
don't
least
forget,
another hour minimum.
and of course,
And there are.
It's all on YouTube.
Give me a minute here, Fleet. Give me a minute. There are roughly another 20 questions in the queue, and we're going to be reopening the queue at least once more.
Yeah. So don't worry, the queue will be opened, and when we're about 10 questions, we'll reopen the queue and take in more questions till we get up to about probably about 40.
But that reminds me, any chance of you returning to Fleet's stuff tomorrow?
Yes, I'll be there.
Because we've been missing you.
The only reason I wasn't there this last week was literally because the Travelodge Wi-Fi was that terrible. Okay? It was that bad. And if I could have sat in the school and done it from there, I would have done. But we had to be out of the school at 5 o'clock.
Yep.
Quite often when I'm away with Justin Craig, the schools don't mind, especially when I'm in a residential centre, and I will just normally sit in my office with in the work portion of the site, and just turn on and do the stream from my Justin Craig office where I'm running the centre from. And Justin Craig don't mind that, the school don't mind. I always get permissions from the schools, and they don't mind. And I have good Wi-Fi. But the Travelodge Wi-Fi was absolutely terrible.
And then just as a heads up for those of you who would otherwise be expecting my soothing voice, ?
Mm-hmm.
I will likely not be able to make Monday ramblings from here on out. Friday is an open question.
Devon Bronk, to answer your question of confused as to why anyone would argue that the IGN would have just turned around and gone home, there are some people who are very committed to the idea that the IGN pilots and air crew have no tactical autonomy, have to just follow the mission or die, and will not target anything but enemy warships on a point of honor, I think, or something like that. I have no idea where it comes from, but I've literally have had comments which are railing into me that the Japanese don't attack infrastructure. They just don't prioritize it, so they don't attack it. And I'm going, that's not quite correct. Now, I have to admit,
Remember,
most of the ruder comments you won't on that front, you won't see. I will see, but you won't, because they also tend to come with swear words aimed at me. And I just find that funny, because, of course, my channel is always little cousin friendly.
Yep.
But they'll, in a nice way, if they're over, if they are, if the planes arrive over Pearl Harbor, there's no fleet there. They're going to hit the rest. They're going to hit the base.
Oh yeah, they're
That's just
going
what
to
they're
mess up. Yeah, they're going to mess up all the infrastructure. It's going to be
Because that's their only option.
And you get a bomb, and you get a bomb, and you get a bomb. And
Because
torpedo
no
into
one
that dry dock.
no one wants to take those bombs back. No one wants to land back on a carrier with a torpedo aboard.
No,
No one wants to do
Hey,
that.
they're not going to be. Surely they're not going to be congratulated for. Yes, well done for bringing your weapons back.
No.
Okay. So
You might as well drop them on whatever you can. Sort of, at least. Yes,
And
it might
also
not be a crippling blow. Just it'll be annoying if anything.
And also politely,
So-
even just because the fleet isn't there, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean auxiliaries won't be there. It doesn't mean that merchants won't be there. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
there will be.
Although I was asked the question of why did Utah
Right,
get so many torpedoes?
Sorry,
and
guys,
the
let's
answer is literally her position line. But let's go on to Knight 681's question.
No, wait a minute. Hang on. Fox is trying to get a word in edgewise here.
Okay, Fox. Oh, sorry, Fox.
So, just about Clark's question, I think the whole thing about Japanese fight aircrew, especially not having tactical autonomy, that comes from a reading of a lot later war, from what I've read.
And it's a misunderstanding of the kamikaze.
Yes, and it's sort of, especially with stuff like the reserve squadrons and the ones that are thrown together later in the war, there's a lot more. You don't have autonomy. You do orders to the letter.
Yeah.
Due to inferior training, but you can't apply that retroactively.
No.
Actually, I've done a tiny bit of research on the next question, so I've actually got a little bit of a.
Well, I'll do it from memory, and we'll see if that matches up with your research, okay?
Yeah.
From my memory, Bureau of Ordnance declared it would take too long to get into service, and so they decided they didn't, but it wasn't worth the time.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons. The other reason was when they were considering it, the advantage in heavier anti-shipping weight was outweighed by the fact that you could get, I think it was, if you could have a ship carrying 8 5.4s, you could get a equivalent ship that carry, as a secondary, you could have an equivalent ship that would carry 12 5-inch 38. And at that point,
May I ask what the
calculations
question
didn't add up.
actually was?
Why did the US 137mm 5.4-inch gun, this is from 1961, project fail? It didn't so much fail as wasn't actually started properly.
Yeah, and by the time they got into the need for a heavier anti-surface armament for their destroyers and secondaries, they went, well, let's just resurrect the 5-inch 54 program, and that led to the 5-inch 54. And again, it's these guns that are between 5 and 6 inches in caliber. They always seem to have very troubled developments until the navies get them right.
It's usually because often it's justifying them. Because 6-inch basically makes it a cruiser weapon. And it's at that point it's a viable cruiser weapon. And below 5-inch and below is a decent destroyer weapon.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Goldilocks. You're trying to get everything out of a single gun and shell. That will kill surface targets, kill aircraft, and that you can have in sufficient numbers to have a weight of fire, but on a mount that's dual purpose, and that you can load sufficiently quickly by hand. It's a pickle.
So then...
I think... Yes, Dragon?
I was just going to ask then, because the French quite liked their 138.6mm gun, and from what I've heard, that actually did work quite well from relatively early. It did have some teething problems, but also did manage. They just manage to sort of get relatively lucky after the first few attempts with it.
Yes, and because that's actually quite a long-running program in that design.
So I know they were looking at that. They initially had them as secondaries before on battleships before moving it over to what's it called? Onto their destroyers.
They stuck with it, basically. That's the thing. Can I answer the next question, please, if that's all right?
Well, I'll give my answer, then you can give your answer. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds.
Black Horse.
That's what I meant.
Can you expand on what made the V2 rockets so hard to defend against? Practically, it's 3 things. 1, it's their speed. 2, it's their angle of attack. They're coming in over, so radar detection, and and then finally, it's speed is there sort of coming quite fast, but the third thing is, what do you engage them with? You can't really shoot them down with your guns. You don't have guns positioned with that sort of level of tracking to do that. And you don't have your aircraft also armed with cannon, and they can't really be maneuvered or guided in time to be able to do the kind of shooting which you need to engage them. With V1s, they're tipping them with their wings quite happily. With V2s, they're not able to get in a position to engage them. So literally, the V2s are just coming out of nowhere. But what you have with the
V2 rocket in World War II is a fundamentally uninterceptable weapon once it has been launched.
Yeah.
It has no guidance you can jam. If you detect it on radar, all you can do is evacuate the area where you think it's going to land, which at that point is so wide an area it's called London. So at that point, your best bet is everyone into the air raid shelters. That's if you detect it, which you probably won't. The first notice you'll have of it landing is when the explosion hits, because you won't actually see it coming, because the speed at which they drop into the atmosphere and actually land on London was such that the first most people knew of a V2 arriving was, well, the arrival. Aircraft can't get up high enough to catch it, as Dr. Clarke has said, and even if they could, the envelope of engagement would be basically slim to none. you have seconds to
Yeah.
let off a burst, and at that point, why bother? Anti-aircraft guns fundamentally can't engage it for the similar reasons. By the time it's in that terminal phase, it's moving so quickly that you're fundamentally going to fail to track.
There are
Even
two
VT
comments
shells
which
might just fail to fuse.
two comments in the chat which I'm just going to quickly engage with quickly. Sorry to interrupt. Leslie, you can intercept on launch. Yes, basically, if you know where they're launching, or you've got an aircraft over them when they're launching, you can shoot them on their boost phase because that's when they're traveling slowest. And to Devon Bronk, post World War II, they bifurcate AA guns again, and they dual purpose as a phase. It didn't last. It did last. That's what the 4.5-inch gun is in the British. It's always a dual purpose gun, and the 5-inch 54 is always a dual purpose gun. What you're looking at is the lower guns below that, the small ones. They go into pretty much AA roles, but even the British AA and 6-inch guns on the Tiger class, etc. They could do dual purpose. They could do anti-ship, anti-surface targets as well as AA. It's one of the interesting things is that because of the nature of the Cold War and the nature of the threats, their AA capabilities are often marketed most firmly, but they always retain a dual purpose capability. And it's one of the interesting things when you get into the Falklands War. The Royal Navy gunnery crews with the 4.5-inch guns were more used to using their guns for an AA role than they were for land attack role. They'd done more practice on that. But naval gunfire support, they very quickly get up to standard and start engaging and using it in the Falklands War. It's just those guns did it. The shells, they retained the capability. No one had really focused on it in the Falklands War. But carry on, Fleet.
Knight, so I'm just reading what you're saying about the short-range ballistic missile could have been a very big problem. It was.
Yeah.
Up until you get things like the nuclear ABM systems that basically take the idea that I'm going to remove an area of atmosphere to stop this incoming weapon. There fundamentally is no counter to the short-range ballistic, or the ballistic missile generally.
Yeah.
Can I just say one
Three.
thing?
Yes, Dan?
They're basically 1940s hypersonics.
Pretty much, yeah. There's no way to stop it.
V2s literally, by some of the definitions used by people, if you compare them to some of the current systems being touted as hypersonic, V2s are hypersonic because at a certain point in their transition, in their flights, they do go fast enough to be considered hypersonic. It's not for very long.
Yeah, but
they do it. So therefore they would, by some of the metrics used to define what is a hypersonic weapon these days by some nations, they would qualify. They wouldn't qualify in my book, but we can talk about it.
I thought hypersonic explicitly referred to something that travelled faster than Mach 5.
Just very quickly.
Yeah, but there's a debate as to how long it has to travel for it. Some say for the whole flight. Some say it just needs to reach it.
Yeah.
In that case, every ICBM's hypersonic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So just to very quickly cap it off, a better way to paraphrase Black Horse's question probably is, what made V2 rockets basically impossible to defend against the boost phase? Because they basically are. If you don't get them before they launch, and you're not lucky enough to have a fighter literally over the site the second they're launching, and are in their very early boost phase, you ain't stopping it. It is coming, and it is going to ruin your day.
But there is claims and reports they installed land-based 4.5-inch turrets that were heavy AA over London when they were radar guided, shooting them down in terminal phase.
Impossible. I'm sorry. Whoever made those reports is either lying through their teeth or making stuff up. There's no way. It's not possible. The calculations you would have to do.
Not really. They're traveling in a straight line.
Fleet, if I remember correctly, there was an example.
Speeds.
Fleet, if I remember correctly, there was an example which they felt it was shot down because it didn't go off. But the reason the shells were in the right area was they were actually being aimed at an air attack at the time. So and the missile just flew through it. So in nicest way, it was a kind of wow. We hit the V2 sort of thing.
At that point, it's at that point I could believe it. But any sort of
Yeah, if I'm remembering the story I've read, but even I'm not quite 100% sure about that story. But that's the thing I've heard. There was an interesting thing. Can't stop the robot. Mr. Can't stop the robot. If I remember correctly, that's the. I think you just wrote that the Minutemen can do can reach Mach 26. I think from something in my brain is saying that's right.
Yeah, I think so.
If the US Navy had gone for the 5.4 inch instead of the 5-inch gun, would that only delay adoption of the 5-inch caliber?
When are they adopting it as battleship secondary battery below their 8-inch guns in the pre-dreadnought period? Are they adopting it as this? Are we talking about the adoption?
I think it's the amount we're talking about earlier, which they were looking at for destroyers and secondaries on cruisers at the beginning of World War II.
You fundamentally negated any idea of the US adopting the 5-inch.
Yeah.
Simply because if they're adopting that gun, that's the gun they're adopting.
Yeah.
And you've got a better anti-surface weapon, no doubt, but you are not going to get the nice middle of the road performance that the 5-inch 38 gives you as an AA weapon as well.
Depends how much effort you put into it. You can get some interesting proximity stuff into it, and longer term you could get a better weapon. Longer term,
I'm more talking about that nice sweet spot where the 38 is quite useful. For the first US involvement during World War II, it just works.
So to use the land analogy, it's sort of the same difference between an 85, an 88, and a 90. They're all basically the same tool for the same job, just slightly different calibers.
No, that's not. That analogy doesn't work.
Go on.
When you get beyond 5.1-inch guns, you actually, because of the way the square cube law works, you start to increase the weight of shell that you're handling fairly significantly. And we're talking about a 5.4-inch round. I mean, the 5.25s in RN service had that horrible problem at first where the round was just so heavy that it was slightly less easy. You could get exhausted manual handling it into the breeches of the guns. Whereas a 5-inch shell is just that sweet side of the array.
While I do understand what you're saying, Fleet, I'm not sure it was quite that bad. It's more over a prolonged period. There is a slightly higher rate of exhaustion compared to a 5-inch.
Oh, completely.
But I mean, we're still talking about single
with a
piece
5.4,
ammunition
that's
here.
worse.
We're still talking single piece ammunition. We're still talking it's in the same ballpark of weight.
When you get into 5.4, you are starting to get beyond the ballpark period. You're starting to actually get into a separate weight category. 5.25 to 5-inch, you're in the same ballpark. 5.4, you're starting to get into the point where you're starting to feel the weight.
Well, the thing to look at is the Royal Navy did use a 5.5-inch.
Yeah.
Which was the secondary on hood, which had actually been developed for the Greek.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would be a good guesstimate for how the crews handled that weapon, and that was a purely anti-surface armament.
Yeah, and it was basically you could fire it faster than a 6-inch, but it was not necessarily going to be as fast as sort of a 4.7 5-inch type gun. I honestly don't know what the assessment of it was.
It was quite light at certain points. There was a nice discussion when you're looking at the F3s, the G3 designs, the F3 designs, all those sort of things, and the stuff looking at null rods, that they could have ended up with dual-purpose 5.5-inch guns instead of having 6-inch and 4-inch guns. Because it was a good anti-surface weapon which had theoretically a viable enough capability for AA. And the thing is, I would add, and you are quite right, Dever Bronk. Yeah, it is it balloons The square cube law causes a shell mass to balloon, but the 5.5 inch. The thing is, the main issue you have is logistics and using it for both the destroyers and battleships and cruisers. Because battleships and cruisers fundamentally can take the weight of far more assistance for loading than a destroyer can, especially under the treaty system. And that means you can put in enough assistance that you can achieve 15 to 20 rounds a minute, which is good enough in most people's views in 1920s and 30s for AA, for your heavy AA. Right?
Yeah.
It's good enough.
Yeah.
With assistance and
Just-
maintain it.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad.
But the thing
weapon
is, the
system or
moment
would
you
be
have to
bad.
use it for a destroyer, where it's going to all be manually lifted, then you're reaching a point at which you start to, if you're going to sustain fire, you're going to have to increase your gun crews by 2 to 3 people per gun.
And you've got 5 guns, and space is at a premium.
And you
And
also
people
then have to feed them and clothe them.
And then you have to upsize your medical bay because you're going to have to account for the fact that more people equals more injuries or just more general health care.
Yeah.
It's a lot of knock-on effects. You're going to need more wattage on your generators because you have more people.
You're going to need more water.
Just say, is this a theoretical 5.5 inch gun? No, we're talking about the 5.5 inch gun, which was originally fitted onto Hood and a few other ships.
Birkenhead, Chester, Hermes.
And there was an advanced version that proposed an idea for the G3s, N3s, F3s, and Elrods as a all-round general dual-purpose gun. So instead of having the 6-inch guns and the 3-inch guns, they'd have 5.5-inch guns. Interesting enough, again, it's one of those things of, if they go the F3 route and they're going for the fast battleship route, they might well go that, because it's going to sound strange, it's going to reduce your weight in aggregate, because you're not going to have to have your separate 4-inch and your separate 6-inch.
And they can have a decent battery, whereas they were looking at having potentially quite an anemic secondary battery or AA battery.
Yeah.
That was the big worry with the G3s, with the F3s, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that does lead to an interesting thing, because if they do that with the 5.5 inch, then obviously, instead of getting the 5.25s, you probably stick with the 5.5 inch. So you're not going to have all the problems with the 5.25 development, because you've got the 5.5 inch, you're just improving it. Which is going to be fitted in, which means that's going to be what's going to be fitted onto probably everything, including the carriers. Which means the 4.5 inch development probably gets left entirely for destroyers, which means you probably get the dual purpose 4.5 inch gun in service for the destroyers before about the same time as the tribals go into service.
No, my question with that is, what happens with the when they start going back to 6-inch cruisers? Do they go for 6-inch, or do they go, actually, we've got these nice 5.5 inch, so do your Leander class and Arethusa class and things end up with 5.5?
They could do.
And then, because the Japanese were using 5.5s from memory, do you end up with the Class B cruisers being 5.5 and not 6-inch cruisers in the London Naval?
You could also, though, end up with the cruisers ending up with a formation of having 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets and 6 5.5-inch guns in 3 twin turrets. And that being their format of 3 turrets of each, with the 6-inch guns being primarily primarily longer range, slightly longer range anti-surface system. There's also the possibility that there's all sorts of possibilities which go into it though. But yeah, because it could be, because remember that does have precedence with the 5-inch, the various different types of 5-inch which certain cruisers American cruisers carried.
So, do you think there's a chance that you get the 4x4 town class then, if you got the smaller 5.5 inch gun?
Oh yeah, that's easier to range because that's going to take up just that much less space.
In which case, that's a very scary town class.
Yeah.
When you think that they will be dual purpose 4x4s,
Can you make a quad turret dual purpose?
That will be the interesting problem. But
I thought they
there
would just
again,
be too big and too sluggish.
the Vickers salesman will probably look at you and go, "I will give it a go."
Oh no, not the super villain.
And the fact that the Vickers salesman is saying, we'll give it our best shot should tell you exactly how difficult it is.
Yeah.
the Vickers salesman's going, "We'll give it our best shot." And by the way, can we throw in some 14-inch guns? They
wanna
go
throw-
beautifully with it.
They throw 14-inch guns at everything. Steve Clarke, freeway standoff, the good, the bad, the ugly. Warspite, Gilead territory in Texas. Opinions.
Well, I am legally obligated to say, as a member of the dried up member of staff, that Warspite must win. However, with that legal obligation out of the way, I can therefore immediately disregard that statement.
So
I
Look,
would
I
say,
work for
in
Drought.
terms
They
of
have-
modernization, the Warspite has has by the end of her career the more modernized systems than the other two. But she
That is
also
a
has
close
other
second.
issues. Huh?
It's
This is
actually
a
in much
close
worse
second.
condition.
Yeah.
Warspite will get dinged up the most, but will walk away or sail away. Giulio Cesare will just prove impossible to hit, and Texas will just give you a kind of a hard look if you try and hit her. And
Texas
keep
will
shooting
be firing everything.
yeah, it's like that's supposed to be your ceremonial saluting gun. I don't care. Fire.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
Accent right now.
You've got the fourth boss character, which is HMS Campbelltown, coming in and just blowing them all up by ramming.
Proving to the Japanese, I can do kamikaze.
This is how you suicide bomb. Or glow worm.
Yeah. So
Next question.
So with fair enough.
Questions. How many questions are we down to, Ron?
One moment.
I wanted to do a non-meme version of the whole three-way battle, but never mind.
There's no non-meme version
question.
of the freeway battle.
That can only be answered in memes.
Because you can just look at it and go, you go, Warspite, she's the most capable ship there.
Question 95 makes 15.
15 left, so 5 more, and then we're opening questions again. 9681. If the JMSSDF had a Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force had gotten all 11 Abukuma class destroyer escorts as planned, what are the short and long-term benefits? They have more hulls. They're useful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Long-term benefits, short-term benefits are we have more construction and hulls. Long-term benefits, we have more hulls. Long-term costs and problems are we have more hulls.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, the reason why they were curtailed was a fairly decent one. The Hatsuyuki class. There we go. I got it right. The Hatsuyuki class destroyers were detailed. They basically came down from frontline service and were filtering into basically the role that these ships have been designed for. And with them being more capable assets, the Self-Defense Force went, why are we building less capable assets when we're filtering down more capable ones? We can save that budget and use it for other things. So they did.
That is an incredibly un-British answer of them.
It's very sensible.
I mean, come on. It's like, wait, we're making something that's extremely effective. How can we make it less effective while still costing us almost as much?
Hey,
What?
look,
That's not what I-
now you're going to get
that's
into
not
the
what I
whole discussion of Type
said.
31 versus Type 26. That the Type 31 was supposed to save money for the general purpose role by being fitted for, not with, and now we are spending the money to fit them with, even as they're being built.
Dad, I don't think that's not what I said.
No, I'm talking about I'm thinking about the York and Exeter class, the cut price counties.
Right. Yeah. I think I get it.
Doesn't that
No,
apply to both county class, though?
We'll leave that to one side. Okay, Stafford Thompson. Other than a major engine overhaul, what is the most strenuous maintenance procedure for a ship in dry dock?
Honestly, probably going to be
Fire control.
barrel replacement, I would think, because you are changing the weight of the ship by you're lifting the turret roofs off. I'm thinking strenuous in terms of the actual hull itself. I know it's not strenuous in that it's going to damage the ship, but in terms of the forces you're exerting by changing the weight of the ship within the dry dock, you're
You
changing
see,
the masts.
You're not incorrect, but
You see where I'm coming from, don't you?
I can see where you're coming from, but you're missing a rather obvious one. If I gave you a clue, HMS Belfast went through this.
Keel repairs and replacement.
Yeah, keel repairing the keel.
But I was thinking that's repair, not maintenance. And you wouldn't have to repair the keel if you weren't damaged, I would think.
Yeah, but the keel often does get damaged. You do often have to repair keels. That's
Fair
often
enough.
a part of maintenance, because if you think about it, every time you slightly run aground over something underwater and you slightly damage it,
Or a really bad storm.
or your own
Right.
engines can actually cause your keel to bend under the storm. Yeah, all sorts of issues.
Fair enough. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's a fair one. I wasn't aware. I'd actually just completely forgotten about non-combat damages to keels. Yeah, no, completely.
Yeah.
That's a me. Yeah, no, fair enough.
Keels are fine.
Because they managed to do barrel changes like almost literally overnight during Overlord, don't they?
Yeah, they basically they don't even do them always in dry dock. They quite often do them pier side if they have a good enough crane system. Lance, how would World War II change if bombs such as the Tall Boy were in widespread use from the outset?
But I mean,
Not much.
It's quite a deep change in the sense that the aircraft able to carry them are a couple of generations ahead of what you've got flying in 1939.
That's the bigger difference. It's going to be the aircraft that you're going to have are going to change things, and that's going to cause an impact, a different impact.
Because those sorts of aircraft do things like, if you turn them to maritime patrol, they can close the mid-Atlantic air gap. Your attacking of cities or whatever is going to be just, you're going to be plastering them, because you're talking about your Lancasters, your B-24s, your B-17s, your B-29s to do that kind of thing. The Germans never got anything close to that.
The Griffin.
Sorry?
The America bomber, the Griffin.
Never got into proper service.
I thought it did. It just never got particularly successful.
I mean, did they use it at all? I don't remember. America.
Yeah, it was used on the Eastern Front to strike in the prelude to striking Stalingrad, the retreat from Stalingrad, and the battles of Kursk and stuff.
I didn't realise they'd actually used them properly.
Yeah, because there's funny records of ground crews having to try and lift the aircraft because of its weight. It required a special lift for the landing gear that made by Messerschmitt, and they couldn't get access to them on the Russian steppe. So they had to get creative.
In a similar vein, you've also got the ME-264 as part of the America bomb program. They were used for a limited period operationally, from what I recall.
And I also think a Condor could carry them. You could probably get the Condor to carry as well.
Okay.
Interesting. No.
Hang on.
No, the Condor could barely carry itself, and routinely it fell apart in the air.
So take out all the fuel, replace it with a big bomb, turn the aircraft into the bomb if you have to.
I don't think the ME-264 was ever used operationally, Dragon. Some test flights, but I don't think it ever conducted any offensive operations at all. But the 264 would be the candidate. Absolutely. The 117 isn't really set up for it. The Condor just can't. I'm sorry. I know you're all speculating, but the Condor just isn't stretched for
I think
it.
you might be right. Oh yeah, no, the Condor's not a chance in anything. But yeah,
But the
because
264 is basically the ideal platform
Condor's-
for it.
Condor is pretty. It is not
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah,
But
264 is
if you
basically
give
the.
Condor some actually good engines,
It's
take
not-
out some of the dumber fuel tanks.
The problem
Make
with
sure
Condor was
BMW stay the hell away from it.
The
problem
trouble
with Condor
is,
is that
at this
it's just
point,
not
you're
stressed for it.
redesigning the aircraft. It's no longer the Condor. It's something else.
Yeah, like the thing,
Agreed.
like at that point, honestly, 264 is a good candidate. 390 perhaps if they wait long enough. But I think 264 is probably your best bet.
Yeah.
You might
I think
see
also-
for longer distance raids, you might see limited use of JU 290 because 290 was around long before 390 was. There were 65 of them built. So 290
Also, something else I think that could be an interesting knock-on effect of this, and that might agree, is this actually probably affects jet development,
Oh yeah.
because jets will more than certainly be looked at. These can potentially provide far more power as needed in certain cases. You probably see jet aircraft earlier.
At least turboprop aircraft.
Turboprops I can absolutely agree with because that gives you the power you need. But early jets basically don't proliferate into, like when you see the Germans looking at strategic bombers with early jets, there's a reason why they're having to stick 5, 6, 7, 8 of these early jet engines on, just because.
There's a reason I'm more looking at the British designs.
Even then,
Arata would like a word with you about that fleet.
Right, I think what we're going to do before this descends into a
Question that
massive
is-
discussion about the theoretical possibilities of heavy bomb programs in 1939 if they had actually had decent engine programs going on that allowed the large bombs to go under. Let's go to Black Horse's question. How many battleships tried to go up rivers during wartime? More than the various navies would like to admit.
Yeah.
I will let the
There was
panel
the ra-
discuss the event of the ones they can remember in turn, and I will add in any which are missed. So let's start off with fleets, because I'm feeling generous.
I'm going to jump in and say define river.
Something which
So,
flows
I
to the
know-
sea and has current and
But
a sort
also-
of form.
So the ones.
And also, are we saying combat operations or just operations?
Let's go for combat operations.
So is a battleship using London docks, for example, going up a river?
Not in this question, because it's not going up in. If it was a British battleship going up the docks to America, London, that's not real. That whilst it's conducted in wartime, it's not a war. It's not technically a fighting operation unless they're coming under air attack from the Germans.
So the one I can think of off the top of my head is it's either, and I'm a little bit shaky here. It's either 44 or 45. And I think it's one of the R's, and it's assisting with operations in northern Germany, and it goes up one
Right.
of the rivers to provide naval gunfire support to forces inland.
Supporting the Canadians?
Can't remember off the top of my head. I know it happened, but I can't remember anything more, and that's why I say I'm on very shaky. I'm on very shaky ground because I don't know what R class it was, nor do I remember exactly what the operations were. I just have that in my head, but that's about all I've got.
All right.
Hey, I'll admit when I don't know things.
I think, didn't something go up the Scheldt?
Mm-hmm.
That's the only one I can think of, and I can't even remember which battleship it was. Might have been Warspite? Can't remember.
Warspite's always a safe bet in these things because Warspite does get around.
Warspite post 44. She had a
Active
post
career.
Normandy.
It was. I think it was like a last gasp thing she did.
Yes, you're actually right. Yeah, the Shelt operation was her last thing she did.
And that was
1st of
like
November 44 was the
44.
last time she fired her guns in anger.
Yeah. Which was to support the Canadians in being impolite at people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a match made in someone's nightmares. The Canadian ground forces and HMS Warspite. Someone's nightmares produced that.
Sorry, I think it was the Canadians with the Poles.
Wow, that's horrifying.
Yes. Didn't Schleswig-Holstein also go up the Vistula?
Yes.
Because she goes past the city of Gdansk to bombard Polish troops. Because she gets engaged by Polish anti-tank guns.
That's that's her operations off Westerplate, I believe. She's engaged by all sorts during the opening day of the Second World War.
Yeah, she then goes a bit down the Vistula.
Right then. So, I think it's time to open up the questions again. Because I think we've got about 10 left. So I think I have to change that to questions open. And... Runon? Was that right? Hopefully questions are open a moment. I've said the questions, the queue's open, but I'm not sure if the queue has actually been opened yet. Because I can't hear Runon's carefully phrased phrasing of "please don't overrun me with questions."
The question posed by Stafford has not been has not been rejected.
That's good.
So that suggests it's open and working. Yes. The combination of Warspite Canadians and Poles is probably something to make the Geneva Convention compilers sit there and go, oh boy, we're on to a new volume.
Whoopee.
Yeah.
But given that they were doing it against Nazis, I'm not really sorry.
Now, Steve Clarke, the Star Wars Trench versus the Tribal class entering Naval. Comments? Huh?
You missed one.
Oh, is it? Yeah, there's Knight's one. Is it fair to say the Loire Newport LN 401 and I think Breguet BR 810 would have been underpowered, probably?
No,
yes.
No, it's not. It's not. It's absolutely not. The 401 was still going through its development cycle, and they only built 15 of the 401 type before they moved on to the 42, which rapidly increased its engine power, and that would have been the type that would have proliferated as the French dive bomber across the Joffres, which I don't think anyone could argue given the increase in horsepower from 690 to 1,000 horsepower.
Fleet 1,000 horsepower is not that great at that point, but also for naval aircraft it isn't. Naval aircraft start getting the same performance of 1,000 horsepower because they tend to be heavier built because of carrier land, etc. Once they've reached about 1,500 horsepower, and it starts to even out once you get to 2,000 horsepower. So they're still going to be slightly underpowered. But I would also add, the other thing is the French have problems in that generating enough of the 1,000 horsepower engines means that they actually were considering still using the lower powered engines for the proliferation.
Okay, so for the 401, I grant you, but not for the 810. The 810 is based off of the excellent BR 693.
And what engine was it supposed to use?
It had two Gnome their own 14 M7s. So you're talking 700 horsepower each.
That engine?
A lot of things.
Yeah.
But at that point, you can't. That's about splitting hairs a bit, Dr. Clarke.
No, that's me looking at the honest scenario for the French and looking at them and going, are they going to find themselves in the same position as the Royal Navy found itself with its aircraft engines in in World War II, in that period?
Well, we don't know what the 810 would have gotten because it never actually entered service. So at that point, we're basically like, if we knew what the 810 would have gotten if an engine shortage had occurred, then we could speculate more closely.
I mean, I think the French were happier buying American engines than the British were, from memory. So they could end up with things like Wright Cyclones and Pratt and Whitney, which are superb engines.
And also with the 810, they're stripping out, I believe, the 20mm Hispano and all but one of the forward-firing 7.5s to save weight. I mean, yes, it's carrying a torpedo and it does have folding wings, but it shouldn't be too much of a decrease in performance. Twin-engined torpedo bomber being what it is, which is funny in and of itself. The French are like, yes, we will have a twin-engined torpedo bomber on the Joffre. Oh, you gotta love the French doing things their own way.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Ah, good old French.
I mean, it probably should have been what the British did after the, frankly, after the Swordfish. If you want to get more performance, stick a second engine in.
I mean, Knight, politely, all torpedo bombers are defenseless if they're caught by fighters. Swordfish, TBF,
Yeah.
TBM.
Everyone would like a word with you.
Yes, but that's a special case.
Like, I think the Fulmar could carry torpedoes as well.
I will poke the internet and see what it says on that.
Because wasn't it 2,000-pound bombs or an underslung torpedo?
I will have a nosy. Fleet is having a nosy as we
I'm
speak.
staring at Dr. Clarke right now.
Fulmar, I don't think did, but yeah, the Beaufighter and the Wellington did carry torpedoes. So yeah, that'll be fun.
No, Fulmar can't carry a torpedo.
Wasn't a light to me. Or was it the Firefly that could? But the Firefly didn't enter proper
No.
service, did it?
I've got
It
a
was
question
a
from
fire-
22. I think I've got a question from quite a recent one, Runon. So I've got Nightwolf's F112s. The group constantly mentions mysterious Vickers salesman. So
Yeah,
that's gone through.
it's gone back to the same thing where it's no longer reading YouTube from the look of it. Because of
Whoopee.
course, why not?
Why not?
I have no idea.
I go to the system. I've got no pending actions, no action queues, commands, platforms. YouTube account is logged in. It's
For those on
connected.
YouTube, just hang on a minute. I'm trying to figure it out. All right, I'm also getting pestered by 50 people right now.
I mean, Steve, I get what you're saying. Yes, a Swordfish has shot down an ME-109. That is true, but that is an outside case, not really representative of the type's capabilities as a whole.
Yeah,
9 times out of 10, that Swordfish would have died.
No, actually, and disturbing enough, Swordfish were the disturbing aircraft in World War II in that they actually survived more air attacks than they actually got shot down by. But that's mostly because they went so slow that it was very difficult for the engaging fighters to engage them. And usually they were operating in extreme areas. Yeah?
We're back up on YouTube now. I have no clue why,
I do.
but
I have
There you
a
go.
theory as why. I just went and checked in Steambot and it said logging in again.
oh, okay, good.
It had logged out the moderator for some reason and logged it back in now.
It's not my problem. Woohoo!
It is Steam Streamer Bot. Yay! I have no idea why it's logging itself in and out of the moderator.
We have fun.
Yeah. Also, I think the Swordfish's preferred prey was either Zeros or Wolf 190s. They found the ME-109s a little bit easy to kill.
I don't think they ever got a
I feel like
zero.
the swordfish's preferred prey were enemies of the state.
The swordfish is one of those. The thing is, the swordfish is kind of like Ulysses S. Grant in that, if you want to go, there's never been a drunk in the White House. If you want to go, there's never been a this in the White House or that. Usually, Grant is the exception to the rule, and the swordfish is kind of a living meme of itself in that. It just stays around for so long in the war, and it's such a flying anachronism by the end, but was actually a very capable, very advanced aircraft at the beginning because of the way it could deploy its torpedoes. It sort of it basically is a flying meme. It's the exception which doesn't actually prove the rule or disprove the rule. It's the swordfish. It's a category of its own. Just leave it be and just move on. Quickly.
It's a mediocre torpedo bomber that was saved by anti-submarine operation.
It wasn't even a mediocre torpedo bomber. It was actually, for when it was conceived in 1933, a blisteringly good one.
It's a peer
Panther would like
asset.
word.
Yeah, it's a peer asset for things like the B5N and the TBM. The British just happened to go with a biplane.
At a point when, just at the sweet spot when you kind of could.
Yeah.
In the same way that the Royal Navy slightly got, opted for some of their designs where the US went a different way at just the wrong moment, but it was totally the right decision in the moment.
Is it not actually stopping the messages going through now? Is it just letting them go straight in?
I don't believe so.
Oh.
I don't believe so. The problem is I don't believe so. The problem seems to be that somebody hammered the button and let them all run through. But either way, we'll work it through.
I didn't hammer them though.
I don't know.
I'm just glad it's working.
Maybe it did. Whatever.
So I think my personal stance on it is I think I can understand why the Royal Navy opted to just go with the 14-inch guns for the KGVs because they just went, we need battleships as soon as possible. We're not going to have time to be fancy and negotiate around it and make somebody else look like the bad guy and things. Just order and we'll accept the compromise because a shell between 14 and 16 inches hitting you is never going to be a fun event if you're on the receiving end of it.
No.
And the same thing with the Illustrious class, that they went, currently land-based bombers and other things look set to be able to put an awful lot of ordnance very quickly on top of us well before we can spot anything coming in, so we need to be able to take the hits.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward months later, and you get a situation where you're like, magic radar.
Frigate.
Oh.
But to be
at the
fair,
time,
even with radar, that isn't necessarily magic for the first beginning of part of the war. Let's be honest. Radar is useful, but it's only after you've learned how to really use it that you start thinking, okay, we can get away with this.
Yeah.
But let's go to Steve Clarke's question. The Star Wars trench versus the Travel class entering Narvik. Comments? Honestly, it would be far more scary to find the amount of tribals which were in Narvik, in the Third Battle of Narvik, coming after you than the TIE fighters.
Yeah, and honestly, given the way the trench limits the turbo lasers to basically a non-threat for the X and Y wings in the trench, and then you've got a limited number of TIEs coming after you.
Yeah.
Compared to I'm a German destroyer. That's
Oh, really, Fleet?
I'm dead.
Oh, really, Fleet?
Okay, how many
The
questions
turbo lasers are limited.
How many questions are we up to, Renan?
One moment.
Target.
23.
There are
Okay, well, let it,
multiple-
well, let it get up to
Jesus.
about 30, and then we'll pause it again.
Fleet.
10-4.
There are multiple thousands of turbo lasers in that trench.
And how many of them hit the broadside of a barn?
A lot of them.
Lots
Many.
of them. Also,
They're
Fleet,
being
limited
fired
TIE
by
fighters.
stormtroopers.
Right. The literal Death Star carries hundreds of thousands of fighters and was even had 4 strike-class cruisers to defend that trench.
Okay, I would like to point something out with the stormtroopers. As much as I love that meme,
Stormtroopers are actually very good shots.
yes, they are. They are quite good shots, as we see in every other episode, except when they're escaping the Death Star.
It's the classic thing of whenever you see a bad guy shooting the main characters, they go wildly inaccurate, and you're like, well, these can't be that big of a threat. Anytime they're shooting regular enemies or people, these are actually pretty good.
Aside from
I-
Disney Star Wars, but we don't talk about Disney Star Wars.
Yeah, trust me, I'm limiting myself on even talking about the trench run because we could be here hours.
Okay, Black Horse. What
We're
happens if the
going to be
Bismarck is
here hours.
captured and
What's your
taken
point?
to a Soviet Union Russian port?
It depends what state she's in.
Wait a moment.
No.
I think-
In the nicest way,
Uh,
she's never leaving that port again. Because let's be honest, look what happens to the Russians when they're dealing with ships which are actually in working condition when they arrive.
Also,
Archangelisk? Yes.
Oh, yeah, poor
she
Archangelisk.
gets sunk before the Russians are in the war, so she gets interned.
Yeah, she ain't never getting out of that.
The funny thing is, the Russians can use her primary 15-inch guns. Because the funny thing is, one of the options that the Russians were pursuing for the Kronstadts was a ship with 6 of those exact guns in those exact turrets. So they have some of the skills to use them. So I can see them actually doing a bit of a botch job to take the guns out of the turrets to use as railway artillery.
Okay, moving quickly on before we go down that black hole. Steve Clarke, USN Top Gun versus the Fleet Air Arm in Buccaneers hunting a carrier in an exercise. Did this ever happen, and do we know the result? Yes, they did do exercises where it was Buccaneers and USNs playing against each other. And from memory, it was fairly even because of various factors which put up. One of the things you have to remember is that both forces are pretty darn elite and pretty darn well trained. And give either half a chance, they will seize it. So when they were fighting, especially in the period we're talking about where the Royal Navy has Buccaneers and it's British carriers versus Calabar American carriers, the Americans do have a tech edge in some ways, but the Buccaneers are really, really good at going really, really low. And a lot of the American developments about how to deal with sea-skimming missiles come from their experience of taking on Buccaneers and exercises and going, oh, frigate, they've done it again.
Yeah.
As I've discussed in the past, the Buccaneer is the only aircraft which did consider itself to be a viable submarine.
If I remember correctly, the Americans.
You have to climb to drop your landing gear.
Climb?
If I remember correctly, the
You get a
Americans.
nosebleed from high altitude dropping a landing gear.
If I remember correctly, the Americans, the early F-14 Tomcats radar couldn't lock the Buccaneer when it was at its attack altitude.
That scans. The
Yeah.
whole thing with the F-14 is it's literally it's imagined because the Russians have things called backfires. Oh, I want something to go and deal with those. I don't want something to go and deal with a low-level near supersonic attack aircraft down there.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, it was fun. It was a fun time for all. But yeah, if the Americans managed to, if similar to the Americans, if their plan worked, that they managed to pull one off, they do damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course.
I remember the documentary with Buccaneer pilots where it's a case of in the exercises, more often than not, it was a mutual kill.
Yeah.
The Americans would struggle to kill them, but the Americans would kill the carrier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Like,
doesn't surprise me.
They
That-
didn't
that-
get a choice to return home.
Yeah, that would probably be about what you'd expect.
And apparently, American carriers don't like having fake 1,000-pound bombs dropped on them.
It would
Can't
definitely be a
imagine
mission.
why.
It would definitely be a mission kill, if not a sinking.
Yeah.
I know hundreds of the British crews coming away and going, "Wait, you mean this wasn't a Sync-X? Oops."
No. No.
You said
No.
you said fake 1,000-pound bombs.
Right.
What were we
If
supposed to do with them?
let's go to Night Series question. If the Sea Vixen had been to get its radar and missiles miniaturized, had been able to get its radar and missiles miniaturized, would that have allowed the Sea Vixen to carry cannons and more missiles? Yeah.
No.
I can see it.
No,
Probably more
no.
missiles.
no. But yeah, technically speaking, it would definitely allow it more missiles, but it wouldn't have cannons because Sea Vixen, as I recall, was explicitly made because they didn't believe guns were going to be that much needed anymore during the Sea Vixen's lifespan, or when they run up to it. It's why the Sea Vixen was purely missile, because even with what Sea Vixen is, you could probably stick at least 2 cannons in it.
Yeah.
But
Vixen is almost the reformer's wet dream of a failed concept. It was missiles of the future, missiles are all this.
The
But the tech
reformers were guns.
really
not
wasn't.
missiles.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
Well,
saying, Fleet.
Like,
It's a reformer's dream because
Ah, yeah.
it was all missiles,
I get
missiles, missiles in an age where missiles weren't quite there yet. They were still wonder weapons, wonder waffle.
Yes,
I've been
yes.
looking forward to the next question.
because
not sure.
Sea Vixen is a plane I very much like, despite many people not being able to stand
It looks
its
good.
history.
I'll-
And
Okay.
oh
Knight,
no, so many.
we
people
are
hate
well
how it
aware
looks.
that right now the bot is not playing well with YouTube, especially because we just got a huge spam of statements from the bot. We are trying to solve the problem. We are aware. There's no need to ping anybody on the mod team.
And
Well,
don't worry, Dragon likes the Sea Vixen for more than just the name.
And
so-
Yeah, it's
the
just a
question,
gorgeous
reason we missed,
plane,
missed question 93 is because this goes question 94, and then question 92.
Yeah, it's a weird thing now. We will probably get to it. You just gotta. It'll appear somewhere.
And then there's question 91. Steve Clarke, HS Warspite, US Texas versus US Texas and Gila Chisare versus Sifu. Discuss Khufu.
Cthulhu. Cthulhu. Now, it may surprise you to learn that Fleet has more than a passing interest in the works of H.P. Lovecraft. So I
You
can
like
speak with,
the host. This is
so I
not
can-
surprising.
so I can speak with some authority here. I know that all 3 warships have plot armor, but unfortunately they're dealing with something that fundamentally
an
transcends
Elder God.
baseline reality. They're dealing with an entity that fundamentally should not be, and quite frankly, basically, if it wants to, a snap of its fingers, can render all 3 ships' crews into insensate madmen on the floors of whatever decks
What do you mean, snap
they
its
happen
fingers?
to be in.
Sorry, Fleet.
Fleet,
Excuse me.
counterpoint.
Fleet. Both of
Wait,
you,
wait.
hang on. Dr.
Let-
Clarke, please change the banner.
Yep.
You didn't let me have a
even just-
moment. But Fleet, you forget, Cthulhu was defeated by a Norwegian on a fishing boat.
The thing
He
with
wasn't
that,
defeated. He went
Yeah.
back to sleep. There's a
Yeah,
difference.
But
thing-
that's how
the
you
thing-
defeat a
It's
Cthulhu
not.
crafted entity.
No, it's
You
not.
hunt him
It's
back
not.
to sleep.
it's not. That's
For once, I
that's
also agree
a
with
very
Fleet
specific-
because I also have quite an interest in H.P. Lovecraft. In fact, it's a common thing on one of my Discord servers that every year the Cthulhu carols are played. Which, if people haven't heard that, take a look at them. They're rather amusing.
you
Jog
get what
off
I'm
on the
saying,
roof.
Dragon.
But yeah,
It's just
If I
like,
was
yeah,
a
it's
the problem is
D1,
the
blah,
problem
blah, blah,
is Cthulhu isn't even snap a tentacle to sort of do things. It's literally if you look at
There.
Cthulhu,
Yeah, it's just there.
you
You're
go
there.
mad.
Yeah, that's
It is a elder one.
yeah. It's an old
It is
god.
unfortunately, yeah. Unless
Oh,
these
no,
are getting some sort of divine
sorry.
spirit.
Sorry, it's an
No,
old
but,
one.
but
Muting people if we keep talking over each other. One at a time, please.
Yeah, like I'm sorry to everyone who has it in for our 3 heroes in terms of the warships, but no, I'm sorry. When you bring in an old one into this, when you bring in a deity of any power from the Lovecraft mythos into something like this, you just it only ends one way. It only ends one way.
Spank it.
No, Dan, I'm sorry. It's not even close.
okay, right. Let's go off Call of Cthulhu. Cthulhu was put back to sleep by a mad Norwegian ramming him with a sailboat.
Actually,
It's highly.
it's described as an ironclad, actually, but
It's
It's an exploration ship.
Yeah.
You
Let's be honest. In a nice way, all 3 of those ships raced to try and ram it. Now,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
They
it's
are,
correct.
you're assuming they are being crewed by sane people. I think this is an error.
but
Well,
you
it doesn't
thing is,
matter
An
what
interesting
the-
fact about the madness, though, as described with the Norwegian whose hair turns white. I can't remember his name. It specifically, the madness is focused on you have to kill it or you have to put it back to sleep. Now, of course, you can't kill the Cthulhu, but you can put him back to sleep.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Foxo, but I'm gonna have to stop you right there.
no.
Right, do we want to
yeah,
move
I'm
questions?
gonna stop
No,
everyone
that's
right
literally what
there.
happened.
One at a time.
I am going to stop everyone right there. We're going to move on to the next question, which is, what are the other ship types the RN doesn't adopt because an existing in-service ship does the job adequately? Usually these ships which are not adopted are usually ships which are paper designs. So in nicest way, the list is either massive or 0. Because you either decide that all the paper designs could have been built, or you decide, well, they were only ever paper designs, they were only ever on theory.
That's a heck of a double. That is 0 or 100.
Yeah.
Wow. Damn. that is
Because
massive.
you could go as more recently as going, well, hang on, we're talking about building the Type 83, right? All right. We went from the Type 42 to Type 45. Why did the Royal Navy not adopt the Type 43? Why didn't they adopt the Type 44?
Yeah, it is a weird thing, that isn't it?
Then
Yeah,
we went from the 23, we skipped to the 26. What about number 20? What about 24 and 25? They're there. I know they were designed.
Couldn't you just say that it's a case of do it as a ship the UK or Royal Navy looked to buy and never bought them?
The
I
thing
think the
is, the Royal
criteria of
Navy is always looking at buying other ships, but they never really. They don't. The thing is that it's an ongoing process. Once you're dealing with a navy the size of the Royal Navy or any major navy, any of the major navies, they will have an ongoing design process. They'll be looking at ships every year, going, oh, "Okay, this is what we build to deal with the current situation." Do it, and then ask the question: do they need to build it? Well, no. The other ships will do the ships we have do the job.
I was meaning more looking at buying third-party ships. That they do at points.
Yeah, but the Royal Navy doesn't build warships abroad. Doesn't buy foreign warships. Even the Type 31 design, which is technically a Danish, which starts out as a Danish design, is so heavily adapted that when people go, well, look, the British did it properly. Look, this is how you think Americans should do that in the Constellation class. I go, have you checked how many differences there are between a Type 31 and the Danish class it's based on? There are a lot of them. There are a lot of differences. And they will look similar in outline. They will. But once you go inside them, they're very different. Now, so as said, that's either no ships or hundreds of every ship. But guys, what would you think of the Iowa class being built with 6 18-inch 47 cal main guns? that means the US Navy decided the 18-inch gun was worth it, and, well, if they have 6 18-inch guns, that's going to be a powerful firepower fit, but it is also going to be a scaled-up Renown in terms of firepower, with the same issues the Renown and Repulse had in terms of firepower. So I think the honest answer is, if they did go with the 18-inch gun, and they are building the Hour class, they're going to up them to probably try and get 9 guns on there. And how it's going to work out is going to be interesting. Also, Fleet, I hear you no longer do post-1991 questions.
I do not do post-1991 questions, that is correct.
So basically, you decided where the Red Fleet timeline stops, you stop.
Well, kind of. It was more due to the fact that it was getting incredibly outside my comfort zone. I wasn't enjoying answering the questions, if I was being honest, because it's not something I know a lot about. And it was getting, honestly, rather depressing, because talking about modern politics is depressing enough.
Yeah.
And I'd rather not. Just very quickly, see if I could just throw my 2 cents in on the Iowas.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'm going to hunt my Empire book.
Yeah.
So,
Hunt, H-U-N-T, Hunt, Foxo, brain out of the gutter.
Yes, I'm pretty sure
very
that. Yes,
quickly-
I'm pretty sure that's what you heard. Anyway, move on,
Yeah,
please.
so
Go on.
very quickly, personally, if what I would think of that, I'd think the US has fundamentally erred. I think the benefit, if you have a choice between 6 1847s and 9 16-inch 50s, the 9 16-inch 50s are just the better choice for your armament fit. If you have to go with 18-inch 47s in twins, honestly, and you're designing the Iowas with those guns in mind, stretch the hull, and slap a 4th turret on for 8 guns. Politely.
But you've got to keep in the escalation tonnage.
That's the
Yes.
It would make more sense to do it with a Montana hull, wouldn't it?
Pretty much.
You suppose you
Isn't
could do it that way.
IO from World Warships Dragon?
But what I would say is that at that point, like I just say, I just fundamentally would not build a ship with 6 18-inch 47 caliber guns.
Sorry.
18-inch guns, Montana is Ohio, right?
Ohio, yes, but that one is effectively a straight asset flip of what if we take Montana and literally swap from the 16s to twin 18s?
But again, that still doesn't fit the Iowa role. It's not fast enough.
Yeah, it's
it's a long time.
No, it's not. They don't. No, Ohio only goes 28 knots.
And I'm more referring to just the rather than the World of Warship ship. I'm referring to the.
You're thinking of USS Georgia.
Yeah,
which
but even
has
so,
which has 3 twin 18-inch guns. Its main difference is the fact that I think it's slightly longer and has it has 2 funnels.
Yeah, but
which is one of the biggest visuals. But sorry.
Yeah, this is the thing though. If you have it's like I said, for me, 9 16-inch 50s are more than capable of dealing with any of the threats you're likely to face. And if the US is going for, I think Dr. Clarke said they'd go for 9. I think fundamentally, by the time you're getting to the Iowas, the US is within the escalation limit, but I'm putting air quotes around that because if they need to, if they feel like the 18-inch gun is what they want in twins, they will find a way to get a hull with the armor that they want and the speed that they want with 8 of them. Or as Dr. Clarke says, with 9.
Where is my book? Yeah. Broadly speaking, correct.
And those ships will weigh what the US says they weigh. If that makes sense.
Anyway. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can weigh my battle